My stepson thought the CEO title was his birthright. He fired me just 2 days after his mother, my wife, was lowered into the ground. He stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by his Ivy League friends, and laughed as security escorted me out into the rain. He told me I was a relic. He told me the company needed a modern face. Paxton was convinced he'd come out on top. What he failed to grasp was that a title alone means nothing. The machinery behind it was still mine. 80% of the intellectual property and assets keeping that company breathing, I never let go of them. He figured he was cleaning house, ridding himself of dead weight. What he actually did was hand back every last key and lock himself outside. Come Monday morning, he's going to find that out the hard way. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories. I'm glad you found your way here. If stories like this one speak to you, stay close and follow along, so you never miss the next one. Before we go any further, I want to ask, what are you up to right now while you listen? Driving somewhere, working through a task, or just taking a quiet moment to yourself? Drop it in the comments. I always love knowing who's in the room with me. One more thing before we continue: some details in this story have been shaped for the purposes of storytelling. Any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. It's the truth at the heart of it that matters. The name's Vernon Calhoun, 68 years old. I came up with grease packed under my fingernails and diesel fuel running through my blood. I built Calhoun Global Logistics from a single rusted pickup truck into a transportation empire. Every bolt in every engine of my fleet, I know it personally. But to my stepson Paxton and his wife Britt, I was nothing more than the hired help who'd overstayed his welcome. The disrespect kicked in before the dirt had even hit the casket. It was a Tuesday in November, and Cleveland was living up to its reputation. The wind sliced across the cemetery, like a blade dragging a freezing rain that soaked straight through my dark navy overcoat. I stood at the edge of the open grave where they were laying Loretta to rest, the woman I had loved for 30 years. The cold never touched me. All I felt was the vast, hollow cavity in my chest where my heart used to live. I wanted to stay until the gravediggers had finished their work. I wanted to be sure she was covered warm and undisturbed. I owed her at least that much. But Paxton had no patience for grief. 50 yards off on the paved path, a black Cadillac Escalade sat idling, its engine burning to keep the heat going. Through the tinted glass, I could make out Paxton inside. No tears. He wasn't watching his mother's coffin. His thumbs were hammering at his phone screen. He hadn't set a foot on the grass, couldn't risk muddying his $2,000 Italian Oxfords. I watched the window drop just 2 inches. Paxton hollered at the cemetery crew's foreman. "Hey, can we speed this up? I have a schedule to keep." The foreman shot me a look, embarrassed, apologetic. I gave him a slow nod. Permission to carry on? That was the first strike. Paxton treated his mother's burial like a logistics delay, a bottleneck to clear before he could get back to his comfortable life. As the crew started shoveling earth, I walked over to the vehicle and tapped the glass. Paxton dropped the window halfway, annoyed, not grieving. "Get in, Vernon. You're soaking wet and you smell like a wet dog. We need to get to the reception. The board members are waiting." I studied him. 32 years old. MBA hanging on his wall. Silver spoon in his mouth, one I had paid for. I kept my voice quiet. "Your mother is being buried, Paxton. Kill the engine and show some respect." He scoffed, eyes rolling. "She's gone, Vernon. Standing in the rain isn't going to bring her back. Besides, Britt is waiting for us at the house to go over the catering bill." I turned my back on him and returned to the graveside. I stayed another 20 minutes until the final spade of dirt smoothed over the mound. I said my last goodbye to Loretta, promising her I'd try to keep the peace. I had no idea then that peace was already a lost cause. The reception was held at our estate, a sprawling property in Hunting Valley, that Loretta and I had purchased 10 years ago. Walking through the door, soaking wet, it didn't feel like a house in mourning. It felt like a corporate mixer. Music playing a touch too loud. The faces around me weren't family or neighbors. They were consultants, lawyers, and Paxton's crowd from the country club, drinking my vintage scotch, eating canapes, talking stock prices and mergers. I went upstairs to change into a dry suit. Coming back down, I clinked a spoon against a champagne glass. I wanted to thank the room for coming. I wanted to share a story about Loretta, how she used to man the dispatch radio in the early days, keeping the drivers loose with her humor. Ladies and gentlemen, I started, my voice rough around the edges. I never got to the second sentence. Paxton stepped in front of me wearing a suit that cost more than my first truck and clapped his hands, hijacking the room's attention before I could draw another breath. "Thank you all for being here," Paxton announced, his voice polished and carrying. "It is a sad day, but also a day of new beginnings. As per my mother's wishes and the board's ratification this morning, I am stepping into the role of CEO effective immediately." Polite applause rippled through the room. I stood there stunned. We hadn't even opened the will yet. But Paxton wasn't done. He turned to me with a smile stretched across his face, one that never came close to his cold blue eyes. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a thick manila envelope, extending it toward me in front of the whole room. Not a gift, a prop. "Vernon, we know how hard you've worked, but the company is moving in a new digital direction. We feel it's time for you to finally rest. Inside this envelope is a very generous severance package and your retirement papers. We're calling it the Golden Parachute." The room went dead quiet. A public execution. He was terminating me at my own wife's funeral reception, pressing a pink slip into my hand while I was still raw with grief. I stared at the envelope. I didn't reach for it. "Paxton," I said, my voice low and edged. "What is this?" "It's called progress, Vernon," he murmured, leaning close so only I could catch the words. "You're a mechanic. You fix trucks. I run corporations. You don't fit the new image. Look at yourself. You're old. You're tired. And frankly, you're not the face of a tech-forward logistics firm." I swept the room with my eyes. Britt stood smirking in the corner, martini in hand, offering me a little wave. It hit me in that moment this had been in the works for months. They'd simply been waiting for Loretta to die. I took the envelope, didn't open it. I knew exactly what was inside. An insult. A check meant to purchase my silence. "Is that it?" I asked. "Not quite," Paxton said. He snapped his fingers. Two men in dark suits materialized from the hallway. Not my usual security. I know every one of my guards, their names, their wives, their kids. These were strangers. Hired muscle. "Since you're no longer an employee or an executive," Paxton announced, his voice climbing so the room could hear every word, "I can't have you on the premises with access to sensitive company data. And since the deed to this property transferred to me as primary beneficiary, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Leave," I said. "This is my home." "It was," Paxton corrected. "Now it's corporate housing for the CEO, which is me. You can collect your personal effects from the office tomorrow. Security will show you out." One of the hired men closed the gap between us, a hand settling on my elbow. Light touch. Heavy threat. I looked at Paxton, the boy I had raised from the age of 10. The boy I'd taught to throw a baseball. The boy whose tuition I'd written the checks for. I didn't see a son. I saw a stranger wearing his face. I pulled my arm free from the guard's grip. "I don't need help walking," I said. I straightened my tie. I fixed my gaze on Paxton and held it. The room was so still you could hear ice shifting in the glasses. You are making a mistake, Paxton. Paxton let out a dry, arrogant laugh. The only mistake was thinking you could stay in the big leagues forever, Vernon. Go enjoy your retirement. Go fishing. Leave the business to the professionals. I gave a slow nod. I squeezed the envelope tight in my fist. Careful, son, I said. That chair you're sitting in runs a lot hotter than you think. And the engine that powers this company, you don't have the key. I turned and walked toward the front door. The guards stayed close behind me like I was being perp-walked. Paxton's voice chased me across the foyer. Don't forget to leave your badge at the front desk tomorrow. I stepped out onto the porch. The rain was still coming down. The door slammed shut at my back, the lock engaging with a heavy thud. I stood there a moment, looking at the closed door of the house I had built. 68 years old, wet, cold, without a roof, fired from the company I had raised out of nothing with my own 2 hands. Most men would have shattered. Most men would have wept or pounded on that door. But I am not most men. I walked down the long driveway toward the gate. My hand slipped into my pocket and found the cold metal of a flash drive I always kept on me. Paxton thought he'd stripped me of everything. He thought the company was trucks and buildings and bank accounts. He forgot about the paperwork. He forgot that 10 years ago I had separated out the assets. He forgot that while he was burning through college weekends, I was restructuring the holding company. I pulled out my phone, rain-slicked and wet. I dialed. Celeste, I said when she picked up. Vernon, is everything okay? I heard about the funeral. I am so sorry. Save the condolences, I said, my voice flat and steady. Initiate Protocol 0. A beat of silence on the line. Then my lawyer's sharp voice cut through. Are you sure, Vernon? Once we start this, there is no going back. It will gut the operating company. I glanced back at the mansion. Through the window, I could make out Paxton's silhouette raising a glass of my scotch in celebration. I am sure, I said. He wants to play CEO. Let's see how far he gets driving a car with no engine. I ended the call and stepped into the dark. Monday morning was on its way, and it was going to be a bloodbath. I pulled into the visitor lot at Calhoun Global Logistics Headquarters at 9 tomorrow sharp. The building steel and glass, commissioned by my own hand 15 years ago, rose against the gray Cleveland skyline like a testament to 3 decades of sweat and sacrifice. My reserved spot beside the front entrance was already claimed, just as I'd expected. I climbed the concrete steps into the teeth of the morning wind. I reached for the door, that same brass handle I'd polished myself on the days when the janitorial crew ran short and felt nothing familiar in it. Cold. Foreign. The smell stopped me first when I entered the lobby. For years this place carried the scent of lemon polish and fresh coffee, a warmth that told our drivers they were home. Now something sterile had replaced it. Ozone, expensive, soulless perfume. I approached the security turnstiles and fished out my badge, worn soft at the edges from years of early mornings and late nights. I pressed it to the scanner. The machine always used to chirp and flip green. Today it gave a harsh, low buzz. Red light. Access denied. I tried once more. Same buzz, same red. I checked the small display. Not an error message. Card deactivated. Excuse me, sir, a voice came from the reception desk. You cannot be in this area without a pass. I turned. Mrs. Albright, who had always kept a bowl of mints for the drivers and could name every employee's birthday from memory, was gone. In her place sat a young woman I'd never seen, peering at me over the rim of her designer glasses, fingers poised above a sleek white keyboard. She wore the expression of someone annoyed, to have her morning social media scroll interrupted. "I am Vernon Calhoun," I said, keeping my tone even. "I founded this company. I am here to collect my personal effects." She typed something, frowned at her screen. "I don't have a Vernon Calhoun in the active employee directory. You'll need to wait over by the wall while I contact executive management to verify your story." She gestured toward a narrow, angular bench, the leather armchairs I'd chosen years ago long gone. I held my ground. Verify my story. The sheer audacity of it was something to behold. My eyes drifted to the wall behind her. The large oil painting of my very first truck, a beat-up 1978 Chevy, had been taken down. In its place hung a neon sign that simply said "Innovate" in bright blue letters. This was no longer my company. It was a sandbox for people who'd never changed a tire in their lives. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Employees I had hired, people whose mortgages I had helped cover, walked through the lobby and studied the floor, their phones anything that wasn't my face. Fear is a powerful silencer. Paxton had made an example out of anyone who showed loyalty to what came before. The elevator finally chimed, and the doors slid apart. It wasn't Paxton who stepped out. It was Britt. White power suit that likely cost more than my father saw in a lifetime. Her heels struck the marble in sharp, deliberate clicks. She wasn't carrying a file or a clipboard. She was carrying a cardboard box, plain brown, battered. She stopped 5 feet from me. No hello. No condolences for her mother-in-law. She looked at me with a thin blend of pity and contempt, the way you'd look at a stain on a new carpet. "We anticipated you might show up, Vernon," Britt said, her voice draped in artificial sweetness. "So I took the liberty of packing your office myself. We couldn't have you wandering the halls and disrupting the workflow. We are very busy pivoting to the new model." She extended the box toward me, but she didn't hand it over. She let it drop. It hit the marble floor with a heavy thud that rang through the silent lobby. I heard the distinct crack of something breaking inside. "Oops," Britt said, pressing a manicured hand to her lips. Her eyes were bright with satisfaction. My hand slipped. That box was so heavy. "I don't know why you kept so much junk in a C-suite office. It really cluttered the aesthetic we're going for." I looked down. Spilling out from the top of the box was a framed photograph, Loretta and me on the day we opened our first warehouse. Covered in dust, exhausted, grinning like we had just conquered the world. The glass over Loretta's face was shattered. A jagged crack cut right through her smile. I bent down slowly. My knees ached, but I gave nothing away. I lifted the photograph and swept the broken glass from Loretta's face with my thumb. "This is not junk, Britt," I said quietly. "This is history." "History doesn't pay the bills, Vernon." She shot back, her composure slipping. "We are rebranding. We are shedding the old blue-collar image, and that includes you and your sentimental trash. Look at this place." She swept her arm across the lobby. "We're painting it all white. Minimalist. Clean. No more grease. No more old men trading war stories about the good old days." She nudged the box with the toe of her shoe. "Take your debris and go, Vernon. Security will be here in 2 minutes to escort you off the property for trespassing." I rose to my feet with the broken frame held against my chest. I looked at this woman who had married my stepson. All surface, no depth. She believed power was measured in furniture and logos. She had no idea that real power was leverage. "I will go," I said. "But remember this, Britt, you can paint over the walls, but you cannot paint over the foundation." And I laid the foundation. Before she could fire back, the automatic doors swept open behind me. Paxton walked in, flanked by 2 security guards. Fresh, rested, radiating arrogance. He spotted the box on the floor and smirked. "I see Britt handled the trash," he said. "Good. But there's one more thing, Vernon." He extended his hand palm up. "The keys." I looked at him. "Which keys?" "The company car," Paxton said. "The Buick LeSabre. It's a company asset, and since you are no longer an officer of this company, it doesn't belong to you. The phone, too. The one I know you're carrying. Calhoun Global pays that bill. Hand it over. Petty. He wanted to strip me down to nothing, leave me standing on the curb with a box of broken glass and no way to drive or call for help. He wanted to watch me shatter. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the keys to the Buick LeSabre. 8 years and over 200,000 miles between me and that car. I loved that car. I set the keys in his open palm. Then came the phone. I'd already wiped it clean the night before Protocol Zero had seen to that. It was just plastic and glass now, nothing more. I placed it on top of the keys. "Is that everything?" I asked. "Or do you want the shirt off my back too?" Paxton laughed, closing his fist around the keys. "Keep the shirt, old man. You're going to need it. It's cold out there in the real world." He turned to the guards. "Walk him off the property. If he stops, if he so much as looks back, arrest him." I crouched and gathered the cardboard box. 30 years of memories in my arms. The broken photograph of Loretta in my other hand. I turned away from Paxton and Britt and walked toward the door. The young woman at the reception desk watched me go, mouth slightly open. I passed the security guards at the entrance. One of them, Darnell, a man I'd brought on 5 years ago, looked like he had something to say and couldn't find the words. The shame was right there in his eyes. I gave him a small nod. He didn't owe me anything. I didn't blame him. He had a family to feed. I stepped out into the biting wind. The door slid shut at my back. I was standing on the sidewalk. The car in the lot was no longer mine. My office gone, my title gone. I started walking. No taxi, no destination. Just walking. The box dug into my ribs. The wind needled my eyes. But moving away from that glass tower I had built, I didn't feel beaten. I felt lighter. They had seized the trappings of power. They had taken the symbols, but not the source. 2 blocks on, I ducked into a small diner where the coffee ran hot, and the owner knew me by name. I slid into a booth and set the box on the seat across from me. I ordered a black coffee and asked the waitress if she could spare a quarter for the payphone in the back. Paxton and Britt figured they'd wiped me out. They believed that stripping away the badge and the car meant erasing Vernon Calhoun from existence. They were about to discover that you cannot delete the man who wrote the code. I drank the coffee. It tasted better than the fancy espresso now being served in my former lobby. I looked down at the broken picture of Loretta. "Don't worry, honey," I whispered to the cracked glass. "We are just getting started." I pushed up from the booth and headed to the payphone. It was time to place the call that would turn their victory celebration into a wake. I fed the quarter into the slot. It dropped with a solid, heavy sound, the sound of consequences falling into place. Monday was done. The erasure was complete. Now it was time for the rewrite. I settled onto the edge of a sagging mattress and took in the sounds of my new reality. The apartment was a 3rd-floor walk-up in a corner of Cleveland, where the streetlights flickered and police sirens served as a lullaby. Wallpaper peeled in the corner, exposing layers of old paint, like rings inside a poisoned tree. One bedroom, a kitchenette, the permanent smell of boiled cabbage and stale cigarettes. A long way from the 10,000-square-foot estate in Hunting Valley, with its heated floors and lake views, But looking around that cramped space, I felt no fear. What I felt was an odd familiarity. This was my starting point. This was the kind of place where Loretta and I had lived as young people, counting pennies to fill the truck with diesel. The radiator clanked and spat out a dry, scratchy heat. I crossed to the window and gazed down at the street. A cluster of teenagers laughed and smoked on the corner. A stray dog nosed at a garbage bag. Ugly but real. In Hunting Valley, the silence cost a fortune. Here, the noise was free. I'd brought nothing but the clothes on my back, and whatever Brit had kicked across the lobby floor in that cardboard box. I set the broken picture of Loretta on the small, wobbly nightstand. Even with the glass shattered, her smile brightened the dingy room. I touched her face through the cracks. "They took the house, Loretta," I murmured, "but they cannot take the home we built inside us." I went to the small fridge. A carton of milk and a corner store sandwich, that was it. I hadn't eaten in 24 hours. My stomach registered the fact, but my appetite was nowhere to be found. I was running on adrenaline and a slow, cold burn of rage. 68 years old, a multimillionaire on paper, eating a turkey sandwich in a room that cost less than Paxton's shoes. The absurdity nearly made me laugh. Nearly. But the laughter dried up the moment I heard a heavy, uncertain knock at the door. I went still. Almost nobody knew where I was. I'd paid cash for this place under a different name, buying time before Paxton's lawyers could track me down. I moved to the door and looked through the peephole. The fisheye lens warped the face on the other side, but that grease-stained cap was unmistakable. Gus. I pulled open the door. He stood there wringing his cap in his big, calloused hands. He was still in his Calhoun Global Mechanics uniform, but the name patch had been torn off, leaving a dark square on the chest. Gus was 60 years old. He'd been with me for 35 of them. The first mechanic I ever put on the payroll. He knew my fleet's engines better than he knew his own children. But today the man who could rebuild a transmission in a blizzard looked like something inside him had snapped. "Boss," Gus said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know where else to go. I asked around at the diner and they said you might be here." "Come in, Gus," I said, stepping back. "I don't have much, but I've got a chair." He walked in and took in the apartment with quiet, sorrowful eyes. No judgment. He lowered himself heavily onto the wooden chair by the window and stared at his scuffed work boots. "They fired me, Vernon," Gus said softly. The words hung in the air like smoke. I'd known Paxton was gutting the staff, but I'd assumed he'd have enough sense to keep the man who ran maintenance. You cannot operate a logistics company without the person who keeps the wheels turning. "Why?" I asked. "Did they give a reason?" Gus let out a hollow laugh. He reached into his pocket and produced a crumpled sheet of paper, smoothing it against his knee. It was a termination notice. The stated reason, inability to adapt to new technological standards. "Yut, tech standards?" I asked, confused. "Gus, you can diagnose an engine fault just by the sound of the vibration. You're the finest mechanic in the state." "Doesn't matter anymore," Gus said, tears gathering. "Paxton brought in these new consultants. He gave us all iPads. Said we had to log every repair, every oil change, every tightened bolt into some cloud system. I tried, Vernon, I really tried, but my fingers are thick. I've got arthritis. I hit the wrong buttons. I couldn't navigate the menus fast enough." He raised his eyes to me, and the pain in them was something I felt in my chest. "Paxton came down to the garage this morning," Gus went on. "Saw me struggling with the tablet. Didn't say a word about the truck I'd just turned around in record time. He just looked at the screen. Then he laughed. Vernon. He laughed at me, told his assistant, 'Get rid of these dinosaurs.' If they can't swipe a screen, they can't work for Calhoun. Dinosaurs. I let the word sit on my tongue like something foul. It wasn't just me. Gus said, a tear finally breaking free and threading into his gray beard. He cleared out the whole senior crew. Old Tom, Big Darnell, even Sally from Dispatch. Anyone over 50. Anyone who didn't look like they belonged in a Silicon Valley startup. Fired on the spot. No severance, no notice. Said since we couldn't operate the new system, we were in breach of contract. Gus pressed his face into his hands. I have a mortgage, Vernon. My wife needs insulin. I've got 2 years before I can collect Social Security. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Who's going to hire a 60-year-old mechanic who can't work an iPad? I looked at Gus, trembling in that cheap chair. This was the man who'd once steered a tow truck through a hurricane to reach a stranded driver. Who'd pulled double shifts without a word of complaint when we were near bankruptcy in the 90s. The backbone of everything we'd built. And Paxton had tossed him aside like a spent oil filter because he didn't suit the new aesthetic. This had moved beyond business. This was an offense against basic decency. Paxton wasn't just seizing my company, he was dismantling the lives of the people who'd constructed it brick by brick. He was replacing the human history of Calhoun Global with an algorithm. I got to my feet. The cold in my chest gave way to something hotter, a white-hot, protective fury. I walked over and put my hand on Gus's shoulder. His jacket carried the smell of diesel and honest sweat. Listen to me, Gus, I said, my voice steady and firm. You go home to your wife. You tell her Vernon said everything is going to be all right. You tell her the insurance is not going to lapse. But how? Gus looked up at me. You're out too, boss. You're sitting in this place. You can't do anything for us. I gave a tight, grim smile. I am down, Gus. But I am not out. And I am definitely not broke. Paxton thinks he took my power because he took my chair. He forgot that I own the building the chair sits in. I went to the nightstand and picked up the prepaid burner phone I'd picked up at the corner store. I dialed a number I had long since committed to memory. It rang twice before a crisp, professional voice came on the line. Celeste Odom, attorney at law. Celeste, it's Vernon, I said. Vernon, I have been trying to reach you, she said, the relief plain in her voice. The board is in chaos. Paxton is announcing a partnership with TechStream tomorrow. He's claiming he modernized the workforce. He didn't modernize it, I said, glancing over at Gus. He gutted it. He fired the entire senior maintenance crew. He fired Gus. Silence on the line. Celeste knew Gus. She knew he was family. That foolish boy, Celeste whispered. Chatitam. Does he not know that federal law requires maintenance records to be signed off by a certified master mechanic? He thinks an app can handle it. I said, but that's not why I'm calling. Celeste, I want you to execute the nuclear option. Vernon, wait, she cautioned. If we do that, we freeze everything. The accounts, the assets, the fleet. It will bankrupt the operating company. I looked over at Gus, wiping his eyes with a dirty rag. I looked at the peeling wallpaper around me. I thought about Paxton's Italian Oxfords and Brit's smirk. I don't care about the revenue, I said. I built that company from nothing. I can build it again. But I will not let him use my legacy to starve my people. Celeste, go to the safe in your office. Pull out the operating agreement for Calhoun Holdings. Look at Section 4, Paragraph C. I heard papers shuffling on the other end. Celeste was quick. I have it, she said. The clause regarding essential personnel and intellectual property integrity. Read it, I said. It says... Celeste paused, and I could hear the smile spreading into her voice. It says that the lease of all heavy machinery and the license for the client database is contingent upon the continuous employment of key personnel designated by the chairman. And who is the chairman? I asked. You are Vernon. And the designated key personnel. She read further. The list includes the chief operations officer and the head of maintenance. Exactly, I said. By firing Gus Paxton didn't just let a mechanic go. He violated the master lease agreement. He legally voided his right to operate my trucks. I want you to draft the cease and desist tonight, I said. But don't send it yet. Let him have his press conference with TechStream tomorrow. Let him stand on that stage and crow about his high-tech future. Understood, Celeste said. We hit him when the spotlight is at its brightest. Precisely. And Celeste, transfer $50,000 from my personal trust into Gus's account. Tell him it's a consulting fee. I need him ready. Ready for what? Gus asked, rising from the chair, something like hope returning to his face. Ready to get back to work, I said. I hung up the phone. Outside, sirens wailed through the Cleveland night, but they didn't sound like a lullaby anymore. They sounded like a warning. Paxton wanted a war between the old and the new. He wanted to grind the dinosaurs into dust. He was about to learn that the T-Rex was a dinosaur too, and it had jaws strong enough to crush a Cadillac Escalade. Go home, Gus, I said. Get some rest. Monday was brutal, but Tuesday is going to be historic. Gus nodded, fitted his cap back on his head, and walked out the door. I locked it behind him. I moved to the window and looked out over the city. Wind rattled the glass, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt the engine humming. The purge was over. The counterattack had begun. The following morning, I sat in my cramped kitchen and watched the world shift on the cracked screen of my prepaid smartphone. I'd built a fake profile to monitor the company's social media. Paxton was live streaming. He was touring the executive suite of Calhoun Global Logistics headquarters. The walls I'd kept a sensible beige had been repainted a jarring, aggressive orange. The mahogany desk where I'd put my signature on 30 years' worth of checks was nowhere to be found. In its place stood a glass table that looked like it would shatter the moment a real work boot touched it. Paxton held the camera high, angling for the best shot of his tailored suit and the city view behind him. He was talking fast, leaning on words that meant nothing. Synergy, paradigm shift, disruption. He swept past the open conference room door and I caught the faces of his new hires. Young, terrified. Looking at him not with admiration but with bewilderment. Then my phone buzzed. Incoming call. The name on the screen, Paxton. He was calling me midstream. He wanted an audience for his victory lap. I thought about letting it ring out, but I knew he'd just keep at it. I swiped to answer. Vernon, Paxton announced into the phone, background noise roaring behind him. I hope you're watching the feed. We are about to make history. I'm watching Paxton, I said. You painted the walls orange. Looks like a prison cafeteria. Paxton laughed. That is the color of innovation, old man. But listen, I'm calling to give you a heads up. In 1 hour, I'm signing the exclusive partnership with TechStream. We're going to be the first fully automated logistics fleet in the Midwest. No more grease monkeys, no more paper logs, just pure data. I leaned back in my rickety chair. TechStream. I knew them well. Their CEO was a shark named Aldous. He had pitched me his software 5 years ago. I had read every line of that contract. It was a vampire deal, one that drained the life from the service provider and handed all control to the software company. Be careful, Paxton, I said quietly. TechStream demands 99% uptime. If a single truck breaks down and a shipment is delayed, the penalties are severe. Paxton scoffed. That is old thinking, Vernon. That's why you're out and I'm in. With their algorithms, trucks won't break down. It's called predictive maintenance. Welcome to Industry 4.0. You should look it up if you can figure out how to use Google. He cut the call before I could respond. He wanted the last word. He wanted to feel like the sharpest mind in the room. He had no idea that by dismissing me, he was walking blindfolded toward the edge of a cliff. I switched off the phone and flipped on the small television I'd picked up at a pawn shop. Time for the main event. The local business news channel was carrying the signing ceremony live, calling it the merger of the century for Cleveland Transport. The camera cut to the ballroom of the Westin Cleveland downtown. Reporters and photographers packed the room. Paxton stood on a raised platform beside Aldous from TechStream. Aldous had the look of a predator who'd just spotted a wounded gazelle, smiling, but the eyes were stone cold. Britt stood just behind Paxton in a dress that caught every light in the room, working the cameras like she was born for them. Two thick leather binders sat on the table in front of them. The contracts. I leaned forward, eyes locked on the screen. This was the moment. This was the trap I had set years ago without fully knowing it. When I'd turned down TechStream back then, I had drafted a counter-proposal. I had established a fleet maintenance standard so demanding, so exacting, that only a seasoned crew of master mechanics could satisfy it. I had filed that standard as the Calhoun Protocol. When Paxton fired Gus and the senior crew, he eliminated the only team on Earth capable of meeting the Calhoun Protocol. But here was the thing about Aldous: I knew him. I knew he was lazy. He would lift the template from our earlier negotiations because he respected my eye for operations. He would drop the Calhoun Protocol into the appendix because it guaranteed quality. Paxton never would have known to look for it. Paxton lifted a gold pen. He faced the cameras. He flashed his teeth. He did not open the binder. He did not read the fine print. He did not turn to Appendix C subsection 4. If he had, he would have found the clause stating that any failure to maintain the fleet in accordance with the certified Calhoun Protocol would constitute immediate default, and that in the event of default, the software provider could seize the operating company's assets to cover its losses. Paxton signed his name with a flourish. Bold, sweeping, confident. He was signing his own death warrant. Aldous signed next. I caught the look in his eyes as the pen lifted from the page. He knew. He knew Paxton was an amateur. He knew he was sitting across from a man who had just fired his entire support system. Aldous wasn't partnering with Calhoun Global. He was getting ready to consume it. The room erupted. Flashbulbs strobed like lightning. Paxton pulled Britt into a hug. They looked like royalty. They looked untouchable. I watched Paxton reach out and take Aldous's hand. The microphone caught his voice. "To the future," Paxton said. "To the future," Aldous replied. I clicked off the TV. The screen went dark, and my own face stared back at me from the glass. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't celebrating. My expression was a mask, cold set, resolved. Paxton had just stood in front of cameras and pledged a 99% uptime guarantee on a fleet of trucks that was scheduled for its quarterly overhaul the following week. He'd made that promise while terminating the only men on Earth who knew how to perform those overhauls. He'd inked a contract demanding certified expert maintenance the same day he'd banned the experts from the premises. He thought he was ushering in a new era. What he'd actually done was step directly into a saw blade. I rose from the chair and crossed to the window. The sky hung low and dark, swollen with another incoming storm. It felt right. Whatever was brewing outside was mild compared to what was about to land on Paxton's desk. I picked up my phone and sent one text to Gus. "It is done. Get the boys ready." Gus came back in seconds. "We are ready, boss." I turned back toward the blank screen. "Enjoy the champagne, Paxton," I said to the empty room. "Drink every drop, because by this time next week you won't be able to afford the water." The trap had been sprung. The jaws were wide open. All I had to do now was wait for the first truck to go down. And with the Cleveland winter bearing down, I knew the wait wouldn't be long. Monday had been interesting, but the rest of that week was going to be a disaster for them and a case study for everyone watching. 70 miles outside of Cleveland, catastrophe was already unfolding on the shoulder of Interstate 90 while my stepson was busy raising a glass to his own genius. The wind was tearing across the open flatlands, dragging the temperature down to 10 degrees below zero. Truck number 452, a workhorse that had once been the pride of my fleet, sat dead in the pitch black. The driver was a man named Tatum. He'd been with me for 15 years. A solid man. 3 kids, a mortgage. He knew that truck better than he knew his own wife. When the engine began to cough and the temperature gauge climbed hard into the red, Tatum recognized the problem immediately. The high-pressure oil pump. A known fault on that model year. In the old days, Tatum would have grabbed the radio and called Gus directly. Gus would have diagnosed it in 10 seconds flat. He'd have walked Tatum through exactly which valve to tap, to nurse it to the next service stop where a replacement part would already be waiting. But Gus was gone. His radio channel was nothing but silence. Instead, Tatum had to pull up the new app on the iPad Paxton had bolted into every cab. He jabbed at the screen with numb fingers, clicking through 5 separate menus just to log a breakdown. When he finally reached someone at the dispatch center, it wasn't a mechanic on the other end. It was a call center agent halfway around the world who had never laid eyes on a semi-truck. "Please hold while I create a ticket," the voice said, pleasant and unbothered. "I am freezing to death out here," Tatum shouted into the phone. "The engine is dead. I need a tow and a mechanic." "I understand, sir," the voice replied. "But according to the system, your truck was marked as serviced yesterday. The predictive maintenance software says it should be running at 100% efficiency." The software is wrong," Tatum yelled, watching his breath crystallize against the windshield. "The oil pump is blown. Send help." "I cannot override the system, sir," the agent said. "I will flag this for review by a manager on Monday morning. Please stay with your vehicle." Tatum flung the iPad onto the passenger seat. He pulled his blanket tight and stared out at the snow driving sideways past the window. He was alone. He was freezing, and he knew that the cargo stacked in the trailer behind him, $50,000 in fresh produce, would be a solid block of ice by the time the sun came up. The fleet was hemorrhaging, but the new man at the wheel was far too busy admiring himself to notice the blood. Back in the city, the ballroom of the Hilton Cleveland downtown glowed warm and reeked of expensive perfume and pure arrogance. Britt had outdone herself. She had taken the emergency maintenance fund, the money I kept in a dedicated account, for exactly the kind of crisis Tatum was living through right now, and thrown a party with it. She called it the Calhoun Global Rebranding Gala. I stood at the back of the room, tucked in the shadow of a wide pillar, and watched them incinerate my legacy. Ice sculptures carved into the shape of the new logo. Servers weaving through the crowd with trays of caviar and champagne. The flower arrangements alone probably cost more than a replacement engine. Britt was in a silver dress that caught the light like it was threaded with diamonds. She was laughing her big laugh, holding court with a cluster of bankers and fashion influencers who'd never shipped a single package in their lives. Paxton stood beside her, looking every bit the prince who'd just received his crown. He was spinning a story for a ring of investors' arms, moving wide hands, drawing shapes in the air. I could tell from the way his body moved that he was lying. He was selling them a vision constructed on crumbling ground. I straightened my tuxedo. It was a classic black suit tailored to my measurements 20 years ago. Not trendy, not slim cut, authoritative. I stepped out of the shadows and into the light. The room quieted. It started as a ripple near the entrance and rolled outward like a wave until even the jazz band trailed off. Heads swiveled. Whispers ignited. Why is he here? I thought he was fired. Is that Vernon? I walked a straight line through the center of the crowd. Eyes down never, apologizing for my presence, not a chance. People moved aside like I was parting water. I read their faces. The pity was gone. What I saw instead was respect. They recognized a man who carried himself like a founder, because that's exactly what he was. Paxton spotted me coming. His smile cracked. He glanced toward the security detail at the door, but they weren't moving. I'd come in with Aldous, the CEO of TechStream. Aldous had personally invited me, figuring it would be an entertaining power move, let the old lion sit and watch the young wolf feast. What Aldous didn't understand was that the old lion's teeth were still very much intact. I came to a stop directly in front of Paxton and Britt. Up close, I could see sweat collecting on Paxton's brow in spite of the climate control. "What are you doing here, Vernon?" Paxton hissed through his teeth, keeping his voice low so the investors around him wouldn't catch a word. "You are not on the list," I smiled, a cold smile. "Aldous insisted," I said, my voice even and unhurried. "He wanted me to witness the future of logistics." Britt moved in front of him. She looked my tuxedo up and down and curled her lip. "You look like a waiter, Vernon. Did you come to bus tables because we are fully staffed?" I looked at Britt. I looked at the diamond bracelet on her wrist. I knew its price down to the because I knew exactly how much had been in that maintenance fund she'd raided. "That is a lovely bracelet, Britt," I said. "It costs the same as 3 transmission rebuilds. I hope it is worth it when the invoices start arriving." The color drained from her face. She hadn't known I knew about the fund. Paxton pushed between us, squaring his shoulders. "Get out!" He breathed, his voice sharp with fury. "Get out before I have you removed. You are ruining the vibe." "I am not the one ruining anything, Paxton," I said. I leaned in close, right beside his ear. The band had picked back up, wrapping our exchange in music, but I made certain every syllable landed. "Right now, truck number 452 is sitting dead on Interstate 90. The driver is freezing. The load is destroyed." Paxton rolled his eyes. "Stop with the drama, Vernon. The system shows green across the board." "The system is a screen," I said. "The reality is oil and steel. You have a leak, Paxton. Not a metaphorical one, a literal one. The high-pressure valve across the entire fleet of 2017 models is faulty. I had a schedule in place to replace them starting Monday, but you fired the crew that was going to do it." Paxton laughed. He actually laughed. "You are trying to scare me. You are jealous because I am the CEO and you are nothing. Go home, old man. Go home and watch TV." I stepped back. I looked at him and I felt something close to genuine pity. "I am going home, Paxton. But you should check your phone. The driver just called the state police to come pull him out because your dispatch center left him to die out there. When the police report hits the news tomorrow, remember this moment. Remember that I told you there was a leak and you chose ice sculptures over patches." I turned and walked away. I didn't stay for the food. I didn't stay for the speeches. I moved through the ballroom, past the baffled security guards, and stepped out into the cold Cleveland night. While I waited for my ride, I checked my phone. A text from Gus was sitting there. Truck 452, the cops got him, but the load is gone. And Vernon, 3 more drivers just flagged check engine lights. I looked back at the hotel. The party lights still blazed through the tall windows. They were celebrating inside a building that was already on fire. The oil leak had begun, just a drop on the highway at first. By morning it would be a torrent that swept away everything Paxton thought he'd secured. I climbed into the taxi. To Hove, I told the driver. Monday had been interesting. Tuesday was a tragedy. But Wednesday was going to be Judgment Day. By Thursday morning, the panic in the executive suite had climbed past fever pitch. Truck number 452 was only the opening act. By midday, 3 more trucks had died on their routes, same high-pressure oil pump failure, every one of them. Cargo was spoiling in trailers scattered across the Midwest. Clients were lighting up the phones. TechStream was firing off threatening emails about breach of contract and service-level violations. Paxton was drowning. He sat in my old leather chair, the one he hadn't gotten around to replacing, staring at the financial reports on his screen. He was hunting for a miracle. He needed cash for emergency repairs because the maintenance reserve had already been burned on flowers and champagne. That's when he found it. I always knew he would. I had practically laid out the trail of breadcrumbs myself. Paxton had been combing through a decade of automated payment history, trying to trace where the money had been flowing. He landed on a recurring monthly transfer of $50,000 going to an entity recorded as Calhoun Intellectual Properties, LLC. To a mind like Paxton's, wired for shortcuts and suspicion, this did not read as a legitimate business expense. It looked like a smoking gun. I can picture the smile spreading slow and wide across his face. He didn't bother pulling the corporate registry. He didn't think to ask the legal department for the founding documents of Calhoun IP. All he saw was money walking out the door into an account he didn't control. He decided it was a slush fund. He decided that I, the old mechanic from Hoof, had been skimming off the top for 30 years. He believed he'd finally found the weapon he needed to finish me. He thought he'd located the reason the company was cash-starved. He had no idea that Calhoun IP was the entity that held the patents for the logistics software he was currently running into the ground. He didn't understand he was staring at a rent payment, not a robbery. But Paxton had no interest in facts. He was after a story, and he'd just stumbled onto one that could transform him from an incompetent CEO into a crusader who'd exposed corruption. He picked up the phone. He bypassed the company's general counsel, knowing they were loyal to the truth. He called a man named Theron. Theron was an attorney who specialized in destruction, the kind of man you bring in when the goal is to bury someone so deep the sun becomes a memory. Word of the meeting reached me through a janitor still on the payroll. Paxton and Theron spent 4 hours locked in the conference room. They drafted a complaint that framed me as a criminal mastermind. They alleged I had embezzled millions through a web of shell companies. They alleged the trucks were breaking down, not because of Paxton's negligence, but because I had been siphoning the maintenance funds to line my own retirement. It was a beautifully constructed lie. Every one of Paxton's failures got repackaged and pinned on my supposed greed. Paxton wanted blood. He told Theron he wasn't satisfied with a civil lawsuit. He wanted an arrest. He wanted the world to see Vernon Calhoun in handcuffs. He wanted to humiliate me the way the fleet's collapse had humiliated him. He wanted my legacy erased so thoroughly that history would file me under thief and nothing else. He pushed Theron to skip the standard civil channels and go directly to the district attorney. He leaned on his family's connections and the weight of the Grady name to fast-track the warrant. He spun a tale about flight risk, claimed I was preparing to leave the country with the stolen millions. I was in my apartment when the story broke. My phone buzzed with an alert. a business blog, had gotten the leak. The headline, "Former Calhoun Global Chairman Accused of Massive Embezzlement Scheme." I read the piece without raising my pulse. It cited anonymous sources close to the investigation. It pointed to the transfers to Calhoun IP as proof of a long-running fraud. It cast Paxton Grady as the courageous young CEO who had pulled back the curtain on the rot festering at the company's core. I set the phone down on the table. I looked around my small, worn apartment. If I'd stolen millions, I was doing a remarkably poor job of spending them. I looked at the peeling paint on the wall. I looked at the single bare bulb hanging overhead. Paxton genuinely believed I was a criminal. He couldn't construct a world in which a man builds something honestly and structures it properly. He mapped his own greed onto me. He assumed everyone operated the way he did. Because he had stolen my company, it followed in his mind that I must have stolen his money. I got up and went to the closet. I took out my best suit, a charcoal gray three-piece that Loretta had given me for our 25th anniversary. I put on a crisp white shirt. I knotted my tie with steady hands. I buffed my shoes until they caught the dim light and threw it back. I was not going to meet them in pajamas. I was not going to present myself as the worn-out old man they were counting on. I was going to look like the chairman. Outside, the sun had gone down, and the street lamps were painting long orange stripes across the walls. I settled into the wooden chair facing the door. I rested my hands on my knees, and I waited. I knew the playbook. They wouldn't come in daylight. They wanted the theater of a night raid. The blue lights strobing in the dark, the neighbors rattled out of sleep. At 9:00, the siren started, a distant wail that swelled and swelled until it filled every corner of the room. I stood and moved to the window. 2 squad cars were at the curb. A black, unmarked sedan pulled in tight behind them. I watched Paxton step out of the sedan. He had on a trench coat, standing shoulder to shoulder with the man I took to be Theron. He wanted a front-row seat. He needed to witness this himself. Heavy footsteps on the stairwell. No attempt at quiet. They wanted every resident in the building to understand that a dangerous criminal was being taken off the premises. Boom, boom, boom. The boots hit the landing. "Police, open up!" The shout rattled the thin door frame. I didn't make them kick it in. My landlord shouldn't have to cover that damage. I walked to the door, turned the lock, and pulled it open. 3 officers stood in the frame, hands resting on their holsters, coiled, expecting resistance. Then they saw what was actually in front of them, a 68-year-old man in a flawless suit, standing straight and completely still. They hesitated just a beat. "Vernon Calhoun," the lead officer asked. "I am Vernon Calhoun," I said. My voice didn't waver. "You are under arrest for embezzlement, grand larceny, and corporate fraud." He unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." I turned slowly. The cold steel clicked into place around my wrists tight, but I said nothing. I kept my chin up. As they walked me into the hallway, my neighbors were pressed into their doorways. Mrs. Albright from 3B had her hand over her mouth. The young couple from 3A stood frozen, eyes wide. "It's all right," I said as I passed them. "Just a misunderstanding. Go on back to sleep." They marched me down the stairs and out to the street. The cold air hit my face hard, but the adrenaline held it at bay. The red and blue lights were blinding. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, and there at the hood of the black sedan stood Paxton. He was grinning, wide, victorious, drinking it in. He lifted his phone and took a photograph of me standing there in handcuffs. "Smile for the camera, Vernon," he called out. "This is going to be the cover of Forbes, the rise and fall of a thief." I stopped. The officer pressed against my back, but I planted my feet. I raised my eyes and found Paxton's. I looked past the expensive coat and the arrogance layered beneath it. I looked all the way through, straight into whatever was left of his soul. "You think you've won, Paxton," I said, pitching my voice just loud enough to carry over the sirens. "You think this is where it ends? All you've done is hand me the microphone. And when I speak, the entire world is going to hear the truth." Paxton laughed. He flicked his wrist dismissively. "Take him away, boys. I've got a company to rescue from this disaster." The officer pressed my head down and steered me into the back of the squad car. The door slammed. The cage closed between me and the rest of the world. I settled back against the hard plastic seat and shut my eyes. Paxton had taken the bait. He had pushed our conflict onto criminal ground. He had invited the police and the courts into what was a business dispute. He didn't understand yet what he'd actually done by arresting me. He had activated the final phase of everything I'd been building. He had handed me a courtroom stage to reveal the true ownership of Calhoun Global before a judge. He had just sued the landlord for entering his own building. The car rolled away from the curb. I watched Paxton recede through the rear window, standing there shaking hands with Theron, savoring his triumph. He looked happy. It was the last time I would ever see that smile. Monday was interesting. Tuesday was a tragedy. Wednesday was judgment. But tonight was the sacrifice. And tomorrow I would rise. The holding cell at the Cleveland Central Precinct smelled of bleach and stale sweat. A smell I recognized from my youth, from before the Empire, from when I was just a kid, out of Hof, trying to make it through. I sat on the cold metal bench and watched the small television mounted high in the corner of the room. It was locked on the 24-hour news cycle, and my face was on every channel. They had pulled a booking photo from 30 years back, a shot from a protest I had attended in my 20s. Next to it, a photograph of Paxton. He looked polished, pained, and deeply concerned. The headline crawled across the bottom of the screen in bold red letters: "Logistics Tycoon Arrested in Multi-Million-Dollar Embezzlement Scandal." The anchor, a woman with a precise haircut and a grave expression, was reading the script Paxton had clearly written for her. She talked about how the young visionary CEO, Paxton Grady, had uncovered a vast financial black hole hidden in the company's accounts. She spoke of betrayal. She said that while the company was straining to modernize, its former chairman had been quietly draining its resources to fund a secret life. Then they cut to a street interview. "Do you think he's guilty?" a reporter asked a young man in a hoodie. The man shrugged. "Rich guys are always stealing something," he said. "It doesn't surprise me." I leaned my head back against the concrete wall. In the span of 3 hours, Paxton had dismantled a reputation I had spent 40 years constructing. To the city of Cleveland, I was no longer the man who donated to food banks and put kids in baseball uniforms. I was a thief. I was a greedy old man who had stolen from his own stepson. The shame of it should have been suffocating. It should have driven me to cover my face, but I felt no shame. What I felt was cold, precise, deliberate resolve. Paxton had played his card. He had gone all in. He had weaponized the media and the police department to paint a portrait of guilt. But he had forgotten something fundamental. Paint washes off. Documents are written in ink. The heavy steel door buzzed and swung open. A detective stepped in, a man in his 50s carrying tired eyes and a coffee stain on his tie. He had a thick file folder tucked under his arm. He did not look like someone who loved his work. He looked like a man trying to clear a case and get home. He dropped into the chair across the metal table, bolted to the floor, and gestured for me to sit. "My name is Detective Creed," he said, flipping the folder open. "We have the bank records, Mr. Calhoun. We have the transfer logs. $50,000 a month going into a shell company called Calhoun Intellectual Properties. It looks pretty bad. I sat down. I did not slouch. I folded my hands on the table. It looks bad because you're examining it through a keyhole, detective, I said, keeping my voice level. You can see the money leaving, but you haven't asked where it's going or why. It's going to you, Creed said, pressing a finger to one of the documents. You are the sole signatory on Calhoun Intellectual Properties. You are drawing company money into your own account. That is embezzlement. I shook my head slowly and deliberately. No, detective. That is rent. Creed paused. He looked up from the file. Excuse me. I leaned forward and spoke at a measured pace, leaving no room for ambiguity. Calhoun Global Logistics is an operating company. It hires the drivers. It purchases the fuel. It manages the client contracts. But it does not own the trucks. It does not own the software code. And it certainly does not own the brand name. All of those assets belong to a holding company, Calhoun Intellectual Properties. Creed frowned and began turning pages. I don't see any lease agreements in here. That's because Paxton didn't give them to you, I said. Paxton doesn't even know they exist. He found a payment schedule and assumed it was theft. But if you pull the corporate charter for Calhoun Global filed with the Secretary of State 10 years ago, you will find a master service agreement. It states in plain language that the operating company is required to pay a monthly licensing fee to the holding company for use of the brand and the proprietary logistics software. I sat back. The $50,000 is not stolen money, detective. It is a discounted rate. Market value would be twice that. I was extending a courtesy to the company because I was still its chairman. Creed stopped tapping the paper. He studied me, then looked back at the file. The cracks were forming. He was a seasoned investigator. He knew the difference between a criminal and a businessman. If what you're saying holds up, Creed said, his voice deliberate now, then there is no crime here. This is a business dispute. It isn't even a dispute, I said. It is a contractual obligation. And by halting those payments and having me arrested for collecting them, Paxton has just triggered a default clause. The door opened again, not a guard this time. It was the precinct captain. I knew him on sight, Captain Doyle. We had sat together on a charity board 5 years prior. He looked at me then, at Creed, then at the file spread across the table. Vernon. Doyle said, his voice weighted with confusion. What in the hell is going on? I get a call from the district attorney calling you the Bernie Madoff of the trucking industry. Then I walk in here and find you sitting like you're chairing a board meeting. I gave Doyle a genuine smile, the first real one of the night. Hello, Captain, I said. Your detective is in the process of realizing that his department has been used as a pawn in a corporate takeover attempt. I walked them through it again. The holding company, the software ownership, the licensing payments. As I laid it out, I watched understanding break across Doyle's face. He was a sharp man. He saw immediately that his department had been steered by a vindictive stepson into settling what was essentially a family score. So let me get this straight, Doyle said, pressing his back against the wall. You are not stealing anything. You're the landlord and the tenant called the police on you for collecting the rent. Well, that's an accurate summary, I said. I non-cover some critics, he said. Doyle turned to Creed. Pull up the Secretary of State database. Verify the holding company ownership. Do it now. Creed moved to his laptop. The room went quiet for 2 minutes. Nothing but keystrokes and the low hum of the ventilation system. Then Creed went still. He looked up, his face drained of color. He's right, Captain. Calhoun Intellectual Properties is a registered LLC. Vernon Calhoun is the listed owner. The master service agreement is in the public filings. It's all clean. Doyle exhaled a long breath. He pressed 2 fingers to his temples. He looked furious not at me, but at what had been done to his department. That little son of a Doyle muttered. He played us. He wanted the perp walk. He wanted the photo. I rose from the chair. The handcuffs were still biting into my wrists. He wanted to bury me, Captain, I said. But what he's actually done is hand me the tool I need. By bringing me in here, you've created a public record of this dispute. You've validated the existence of the holding company in an official proceeding. Doyle crossed the room and unlocked the cuffs himself. The steel released, and the feeling rushed back into my hands. I'm sorry, Vernon, Doyle said. We were executing a warrant sworn by the sitting CEO. We had no choice but to bring you in. I rubbed my wrists. I understand. You were doing your job. But now I need you to do me a favor. Doyle's expression went cautious. What kind of favor? Release me, I said. But don't announce it. Before we get to what happens next, and what Vernon is about to set in motion from the last place anyone would expect, let me ask you something. If someone had used your trust against you and you finally had the proof, would you confront them head-on, or would you wait and let them believe they had already won? Don't call the press, I said. Let the media keep running with the story that I'm behind bars. Let Paxton spend the whole weekend believing I'm rotting in this cell. Why? Creed asked. Why would you want the world thinking you're a criminal? Because, I said, stepping to the mirror on the wall to straighten my tie, Monday is the shareholder meeting. Paxton is going to walk into that room convinced he's already won. He'll be arrogant. He'll be flat-footed. I want him to feel the full weight of his victory before I pull the floor out from under him. Doyle studied me for a long moment. He saw what was behind my eyes. He understood that this had moved beyond a business dispute. This was about justice. We can release you on your own recognizance pending further investigation, Doyle said carefully. If you happen to slip out the back and avoid the reporters waiting up front, well, that's not something I can control. Thank you, Captain, I said. I collected my belongings, my wallet, my watch, the keys to my apartment. I signed the release paperwork with a steady hand. As I moved toward the rear exit, Detective Creed called after me. Mr. Calhoun, he said. One question. If you own the software and Paxton just had you arrested for collecting payment on it, what happens to the software now? I stopped and turned back. The contract specifies that in the event of a hostile legal action against the owner, the license is revoked immediately, I said. Creed's eyes went wide. You mean? I mean that the entire Calhoun global fleet is currently operating on revoked software, I said. And come Monday morning, I am going to switch it off. I pushed through the back door and into the alley behind the precinct. The night air was sharp and cold. The city slept on, oblivious to the countdown that was already running. Paxton was probably pouring champagne right now, probably raising a glass to my destruction. What he didn't know was that he had locked himself in a cage with a tiger and tossed away the key himself. I pulled my coat close and started the long walk back to my apartment. 48 hours. That's what I had. 48 hours to pull the final pieces into place, to let the world sit with its lie so that the truth would land with twice the force when it arrived. The night was quiet around me, but it wasn't empty. It was coiled. Waiting. The storm had passed. The flood was still coming, and I was the one standing at the controls of the dam. The silent chairman was about to find his voice, and when he did, it would shake the ground beneath their feet. Sunday was meant to be their victory lap. While I sat in my small apartment turning pages in a paperback and drinking instant coffee. Paxton and Britt were uncorking bottles in the executive penthouse of Calhoun Global Tower. They'd spent the morning giving interviews to business journals describing how they had delivered the company from the corruption of its past. They were the healers who had cut out the cancer. I was the cancer. They were the surgeons. They had come to believe their own story so completely that they had lost track of who built the hospital in the first place. I can picture it with no effort at all, because I know them. Britt would have ordered the most extravagant catering spread available, even though it was just the two of them. She'd be dressed as if the empty office were a fashion event. Paxton would be stretched out in my chair, feet up on the desk, nursing a glass of Cristal. He'd be gazing out over the city, feeling like a man who owned it. He thought the hard part was finished. He thought putting me in handcuffs was the checkmate that ended the game. He didn't understand that by arresting me, he hadn't ended anything. He had simply started the clock on something that was ticking directly beneath his chair. They were celebrating a theft they had convinced themselves was a business strategy. Paxton was probably scrolling through his phone, reading every comment on every article that tore my reputation apart. "Look at this Brit," he'd say. "The whole world is with us. The stock is going to explode on Monday." They were drunk on their own reflection, so busy congratulating themselves on seizing the keys to the castle that they never once thought to check whether the locks had been changed. What they failed to grasp was that a company is not just a collection of trucks and buildings. It is a system, and systems operate according to rules. At exactly noon on Sunday, a rule I had written into the core code of the Calhoun Logistics operating system executed itself. A simple command, a few lines drafted with the help of a young developer 10 years prior. A failsafe, a dead man's switch. The system was built to ping the central server of Calhoun intellectual properties every 24 hours to confirm the license key was valid. If that server returned a specific error code indicating a legal breach, the operating system would treat it as a hostile takeover. At 11:59, Paxton was the CEO of a global logistics empire. At 12:01 and 1 second, he was the captain of a ship taking on water. The change didn't announce itself with a crash or an alarm. It came as a flicker. The massive 80-inch monitors lining the walls of the command center had been displaying the real-time GPS positions of 3,000 trucks, a luminous web of green lights, tracing their paths across the North American map. The living heartbeat of the company. Then all at once, the green lights went still. Paxton probably didn't register it immediately. He was likely reaching for another pour of champagne. But then the screens blinked. The map vanished. The data streams, weather overlays, fuel metrics, delivery timelines, routing projections, all of it disappeared. What replaced it was a single unbroken field of color. Red. A bright, furious crimson that bathed the entire office in the color of emergency. Britt would have been the first to react. She had no tolerance for anything ugly, and this was profoundly ugly. "What did you do, Paxton?" She would have screamed, her glass slipping from her hand. "Why are all the screens red?" Paxton would have bolted out of my chair. He'd have rushed to the main console and hammered on the keyboard, convinced it was a screensaver or some minor glitch. But the keyboard gave nothing back. The mouse sat dead in his hand. Then, centered in the wall of red, a message materialized in large white letters. Not a cryptic error, string a message I had composed myself. License expired. Authorization revoked due to breach of contract. System locked. Please contact the intellectual property holder immediately. Paxton stared at it. He read it once. Read it again. He shook his head, trying to blink through the champagne fog. Contact the intellectual property holder. He knew exactly who that was. He had signed the arrest warrant himself. "This is a bug," Paxton muttered, his hands unsteady. "This is just a system glitch. I'll get it to you on the phone." He grabbed his cell and dialed the new IT director, a 24-year-old named Colt. He'd brought in the kind who wore flip-flops to the office. "Colt, fix the screens!" Paxton shouted. "Everything's gone red. It says license expired." "I know, boss," Colt answered, his voice shaking. "It's not just your office, it's everything. The server room is flashing red. Dispatch computers are locked down. Even the coffee machine in the break room, it's digital, and it's throwing the same error." "You reboot it," Paxton snapped. "Just unplug the whole thing and start over." "We did," Colt said. "We've rebooted the mainframes 3 times. Same screen every time. It's a hard lock, it's baked into the firmware. The system is demanding a cryptographic key to release it." "Do you have the key?" "I don't have a key," Paxton shouted. "I'm the CEO, I shouldn't need a key. Bypass it, hack it, do something." "I can't hack this," Colt said, and the fear in his voice was unmistakable. "This is military-grade encryption. Whoever wrote this built a trapdoor into it, and they just pulled the lever. We are locked out of our own database." Paxton let the phone drop. He looked over at Britt. She was standing at the window, her face bloodless, the red glow from the screens reflecting in her eyes and making her look hollowed out. "Fix this, Paxton," she said through her teeth. "We have a party tonight. We have investors arriving tomorrow. Fix this, now." But Paxton could not fix it. And then the phones began to ring. It started with a single tone from the reception desk outside the office. Then another. Then the emergency line in the command center. Within 30 seconds, the room was swamped in a wall of ringing, the sound of 1,000 problems arriving at the same moment. Paxton stared at the blinking lights cascading across the phone console. He was afraid to pick up. But he had no choice. He walked over and pressed the speakerphone button. What came through wasn't a polite customer inquiry. It was the sound of raw, unfiltered fury. "This is Dispatch Unit 4 in Indiana," a voice screamed through the static. "My entire dashboard just went black. I'm doing 65 miles an hour on the turnpike and my navigation is gone. My electronic logging device is dead. I cannot legally operate this truck without a log. What is happening?" Paxton tried to respond, but another line cut straight over him. "This is the warehouse manager in Pittsburgh. The inventory scanners are down. The robotic sorting arms froze in place mid-cycle. I've got 40 tons of perishable seafood sitting on the loading dock, and I can't move it. The automated gates won't respond. The temperature is climbing. This cargo rots in 2 hours. Paxton switched lines again. "This is the Port Authority in New Jersey. Your trucks are blocking the terminal entrance. Their electronic gate passes are being rejected across the board. You have backed up traffic 3 miles. Move your vehicles now or we begin impounding them." Paxton stepped back from the console. He looked down at his hands. They wouldn't stop shaking. He looked up at the red screens. That message stared back at him like a taunt. License expired. This wasn't a software crash. It was a physical shutdown. The modern trucks Paxton had been so proud of were computers on wheels. Strip away the software and you had nothing but very expensive dead weight. The refrigeration units on the reefer trailers had been coordinated through the central server to optimize fuel consumption. When the server locked, those cooling units dropped into safety mode and cut out entirely. Millions of dollars worth of ice cream, pharmaceuticals, and meat were quietly liquefying in trailers stretched across the country. "Make it stop!" Britt shrieked, pressing her palms over her ears to block out the wall of ringing phones. "I can't," Paxton whispered. "I don't have the password." He lunged for his laptop, yanking it open. Maybe he could pull up a cloud backup. Maybe there was a workaround buried somewhere. He typed in his username Paxton Grady CEO. He typed his password King of the World 123. He hit enter. The dashboard didn't load. The screen went red. Same color. Same message. Access denied. User account suspended by administrator. Administrator. There was only one person who held that title, the man he'd just sent to jail. Paxton understood it then. He wasn't the king. He was a squatter. He had thrown the rightful owner off the property without the first idea of how to work the furnace or flip on the lights. Now winter had arrived, and he was standing in the dark, freezing. He grabbed his coat. "Where are you going?" Britt demanded. "I have to get to the police station," Paxton said, his voice hollowed out. "I need to talk to Vernon." "You can't," Britt said, seizing his arm. "You had him arrested. If you walk in there and beg for help, you look weak. You're admitting you need him." "No, I don't have a choice," Paxton shot back, wrenching free. "The cargo is rotting, Britt. The trucks are stopped dead. Every minute we're offline costs us $10,000. Run the numbers. We'll be bankrupt by sunrise." He bolted out of the office, leaving Britt alone with the red screens and the phones that wouldn't stop screaming. He rode the elevator down to the parking garage, climbed into his car, and jammed the key into the ignition. But the moment he pulled out onto the street, he ran straight into gridlock. He sat there stuck until he saw the reason. A Calhoun Global delivery truck had stalled in the dead center of the intersection, blocking all 4 lanes. The driver was standing on the hood, arms raised, shouting at a sea of furious commuters. Paxton stared at the trailer. Painted along its side in large, bright letters was the company slogan, "Moving the future." The future wasn't moving. It sat perfectly still. And the man who held the only key to restart it was in a holding cell, watching the clock and waiting for the call he knew was coming. The kill switch had performed flawlessly. The quiet of the arrest was finished. The roar of the collapse had begun. The executive suite of Calhoun Global looked like the bridge of the Titanic in the minutes after the hull gave way. The locked screens washed the room in that hellish red glow. Paxton was wearing a groove into the expensive carpet I had bought, pacing in tight circles, with a phone pressed to each ear, screaming at people who had nothing useful to give him. His left hand held the external IT support firm. His right held the VP of operations. Neither had answers, only a longer list of problems. "I'm not paying you to inventory what you can't do," Paxton yelled at the IT consultant. "I'm paying you to get through the firewall. It's code. Break it." "I cannot break it, sir." The voice on the other end replied loud enough that I can picture it perfectly. "This is a hardware lockout. The server has physically disconnected itself from the network it's running in failsafe isolation. Without the master encryption key, you would need a supercomputer and 100 years to work through it." Paxton hurled that phone at the wall. It shattered and left a gouge in the plaster. He didn't even glance at it. He turned to the other phone. "I just dispatched the trucks anyway." He barked at the operations VP. "Tell the drivers to use paper maps. Tell them to run manual." "We can't do that, sir," the VP said, his voice stumbling. "These trucks are fully electronic. The ignition interlock is tied to the central server. If the server says no, the engine doesn't turn over. We have 3,000 trucks effectively bricked. They're sitting like metal sculptures blocking highways from New York to Los Angeles." Then the third phone rang. The red phone on the desk. The private line. Paxton went rigid. He knew exactly who had that number and who would be calling on a Sunday night at this hour. Aldous, TechStream. Paxton lifted the receiver with a hand that wasn't entirely steady. "Aldous," he said, forcing a veneer of calm. "We're experiencing a minor technical disruption. We'll have it resolved within the hour." Sir Paxton, stop! Aldis's voice was cold enough to frost glass. I'm looking at my dashboard right now. Your entire fleet has gone dark. 0 uptime. Do you understand what that number means? It means we have a temporary setback, Paxton said, dragging a sleeve across his forehead. But we can correct it. It means you are in breach of contract. Aldis cut him off. Section 9, Clause 2. Uptime below 90% for more than 4 hours triggers the penalty clause. You've been down for 6 hours. We can work through this, Paxton said, his voice dropping toward a plea. Give me until morning. There is nothing to work through, Aldis said. My legal team is drafting the paperwork at this moment. You owe TechStream $50 million in performance penalties. And since I'm well aware your operating company doesn't have that kind of liquidity, we are exercising our lien on your accounts receivable. We are freezing your bank accounts, Paxton. Every dollar that comes in flows to us until the balance is cleared. Wait, Paxton said, his voice cracking. You cannot do that. That will wipe us out. We won't make payroll. Hyvond, you should have considered that before signing a contract you weren't equipped to honor, Aldis said. You have until 8 a.m. to restore service. If the system is not green by the opening bell of the stock market, I go public with the breach. Your stock will be worth less than the paper it trades on. Good luck, Paxton. The line went dead. Paxton stood there holding the receiver. 50 million. He didn't have 50 million. He didn't have $5 million. The reserves had gone into the rebranding. The safety net had paid for the party. He set the receiver and it clattered against the desk in the sudden silence. Then Britt started screaming. She'd been on the leather sofa the whole time, scrolling through her phone, watching the backlash detonate across social media. Drivers were posting photographs of stranded trucks. Customers were flooding every platform with rage. The brand she had poured herself into polishing was being dragged through the gutter in real time. You idiot! Britt screamed, shooting up from the sofa and flinging her phone at Paxton. It missed and punched into the window. You told me you had this under control. You told me the software deal was ironclad. It was ironclad, Paxton shouted back, his face going dark red. It was supposed to be seamless. How was I supposed to know the old man had booby-trapped the system? Because you are the CEO, Britt screamed. That is literally your job to know. But you're not really a CEO, are you, Paxton? You're a little boy playing dress-up in his father's suit. But don't you dare speak to me like that! Paxton stepped toward her, hands balled at his sides. I made you who you are. Without me, you're just a waitress from the suburbs. And without Vernon, you are absolutely nothing. Britt let out a laugh, sharp and ugly. You fired the only people who actually knew how to keep this place running. You had the man who built it thrown in a cell, and now you've torched my reputation along with everything else. Do you have any idea what they're saying about us out there? They're calling us the clueless couple. They're laughing at us, Paxton. I don't care about your Instagram follower count, Paxton roared. I am trying to keep this company alive. I need cash. Where is the maintenance fund? The one you said we could tap into? I spent it, Britt said, folding her arms across her chest. You what? Paxton stared at her. Every last dollar. The gala wasn't free, Paxton. The florals, the champagne, the gift bags. You wanted to look wealthy, didn't you? You needed everyone to see that we were above Vernon. Well, we looked absolutely spectacular while it was all burning down. You blew $300,000 on a party. Paxton grabbed his own hair, yanking at it. That was our emergency reserve. That was the money I needed to keep the lawyers in the fight against TechStream. You are pathetic, Britt spat. You are broke. You are incompetent, and I am done. I am going to my mother's. I won't be standing here when the police show up to throw us out. She reached for her purse, but Paxton stepped into her path. You are not walking out of here, he said. You are in this right beside me. You signed those checks too, Britt. If I go down for negligence, you go down for embezzlement. They stood there beneath the red wash of the dying server lights, each despising the other. Whatever love they had once claimed had vanished, evaporated the second the money stopped moving. They were two rats on a sinking ship, clawing each other over the last scrap. Then the office door burst open. It was Theron, the attorney Paxton had hired to dismantle me, but Theron didn't carry himself with any confidence today. His tie sat crooked. His complexion was ashen. He had a thick binder tucked under his arm, the original incorporation documents of the company. Paxton, stop! Stop fighting! Theron said, his voice coming out in breathless bursts. We have a problem that makes TechStream look minor. What could possibly be bigger than $50 million? Paxton demanded, still not taking his eyes off Britt. I just finished going through the master source code agreement. Theron said, crossing to the desk and slamming the binder open. I had to go all the way down to the basement archives to dig it out. Filed 20 years ago. So what Paxton said. It's an old contract. It doesn't apply. It applies, Theron said, pressing his finger to a paragraph on the final page. Because I found the unlock protocol. The system was designed by Vernon and a military contractor. It has a biometric override built in. Great Paxton said, a flicker of hope crossing his face. So we pull a fingerprint. Get Gus. Get one of the old mechanics. It's not just any fingerprint, Theron said, shaking his head. The contract is explicit. In the event of a catastrophic system lockdown triggered by a license dispute, only the biometric data of the registered intellectual property owner can reset the server. Paxton went quiet. He looked at Theron. He looked at the red screens. Say it, Paxton whispered. It's Vernon, Theron said. Only Vernon. We need his thumbprint on the physical scanner in the basement. Nobody else qualifies. Not you. Not me. Not the entire board. If Vernon doesn't touch that scanner within 24 hours, the data wipes itself clean. Permanent deletion. The customer database. The financial records. The shipping logs. Everything reduced to nothing. Paxton sank back into his chair. The same chair he had thrown me out of. The full weight of what he had done was settling over him. He had arrested the one man who held the power to save him. He had locked the savior away and pocketed the key. He's in jail. Paxton whispered, barely making a sound. I put him there. Then you'd better get him out, Theron said, closing the binder. And you'd better hope he's in a forgiving frame of mind. Because right now, Vernon Calhoun isn't just the chairman. He is God. And you are a sinner standing before a very angry deity. Paxton's eyes drifted to the phone on the desk. He understood what had to be done. He had to make the one call he had sworn he would never make. He had to beg. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about survival itself. He reached for the receiver hand, trembling so badly he had to focus just to dial the number for the precinct. Monday was going to be something else entirely. But Sunday night was the longest stretch of his life. The clock mounted on the wall of the executive suite ticked out each second into the silence of the lockdown building. It was 2:00 in the morning. Cleveland was asleep, but inside the glass tower of Calhoun Global, there was no rest to be found. Emergency lighting soaked the office in a hard crimson glow, carving deep shadows in every corner, shadows that shifted like ghosts in the red dark. Paxton sat at the desk that used to be mine. He was staring at that telephone the way a man stares at a loaded gun. For the last hour he had worn a path around the room. His tie had been loosened until it hung slack against his chest. His sleeves were rolled back, exposing the expensive watch that was now ticking down the minutes to his own ruin. I can only imagine the battle being waged inside that head of his. Paxton was a man constructed entirely out of pride. His whole life he had worked to convince himself he was my superior. He told himself he was sharper because he'd attended the right schools. He told himself he was more entitled because he carried the right bloodline. To him, I was just the mechanic who caught a lucky break. I was the stepfather who smelled of motor oil and couldn't tell a Monet from a movie poster. To pick up that phone and call me wasn't just a concession of defeat. It was the demolition of everything he believed himself to be. He would have to admit that the MBA, the tailored suits, the whole rebranding campaign, none of it meant a thing without the one person he had always looked down on. Me. He stared at the red screens again. License expired. Still there. Still mocking him. He thought about the morning. He thought about the investors walking through the door at 8 Silverum. He thought about Aldous from TechStream, waiting to seize control of the bank accounts. He thought about the headlines. CEO bankrupts company in 1 week. The fear of humiliation finally outweighed the fear of submission. He understood that if he didn't call me, he would lose everything. The house, the cars, the name. He'd be nothing. And being nothing was the one thing Paxton Grady could not endure. He extended his hand. His fingers were shaking so violently he had to use the other hand just to hold them steady. He lifted the receiver. It felt heavier than it had any right to. He dialed my number. I know he went slowly, digit by digit, hoping maybe I wouldn't pick up. Hoping some miracle would intervene before the last number was pressed. But there are no miracles reserved for the arrogant. There are only consequences. I was settled into my armchair in the small apartment, not sleeping. I had a cup of herbal tea in my hand and a John Coltrane record on a portable player spinning quietly behind me. I was calm. I had been waiting for this moment from the day he pushed me out the door. When the phone rang, I didn't reach for it right away. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him sitting there wondering whether I had changed my number. On the 4th ring, I answered. Hello, Paxton. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't ask why he was calling. My voice was steady and stripped of anything warm. Hey, Vernon. Paxton's voice came out high and breathless. He was reaching for casual. He was trying to sound like a son phoning his father to catch up, not like a drowning man clawing for a life vest. Hope I didn't wake you, Paxton said. I know it's late, but we've got a bit of a situation down here at the office. A situation, I repeated. Is that what you're calling it? Yeah, just a technical glitch, Paxton said, pushing out a nervous laugh. The system seems to have locked up on us. The IT guys are saying it's some old legacy code that needs an override. We figured since you know the old systems better than anyone, you could swing by and take a look. Give us a hand. We'd cover you with a consulting fee. I took a slow sip of my tea. The audacity of this boy truly knew no ceiling. He'd had me arrested 6 hours ago, and now he was dangling a consulting fee. You want me to come down there? I asked, keeping my pace deliberate. To the building I've been banned from to help the company that fired me to assist the CEO who put me in handcuffs. Paxton went silent for a beat. I could hear his breathing on the line. It was ragged. Look, Vernon, let's not get stuck in the past. Paxton said, his voice pulling tight. We both said some things in the heat of the moment. The arrest, that was a misunderstanding. The lawyers got overzealous. I can make all of that disappear. I can have the charges dropped first thing tomorrow morning. You can drop the charges, I said, letting those words hang in the air between us. That is very generous of you, Paxton. But the charges aren't what concern me. The police already have the full picture. They know the software belongs to me. They know you've been running pirated code. Paxton's composure started fracturing. The easy, casual tone dissolved into something closer to panic. Okay, fine. The software is yours. You've made your point, Vernon. You've shown everyone how clever you are. Congratulations. Now please just switch it back on. We are bleeding millions by the hour. The trucks are sitting still. The drivers are out there freezing. Do it for them. You always said the employees were what mattered most, right? Prove it. Turn the server back on. I got up from my chair and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened street below. I do care about them, Paxton, I said. That is precisely why I'm doing this. I am protecting the company from you. What are you talking about? Paxton shouted, his control gone completely. You are the one tearing it apart. If we default on the TechStream contract, it's over for us. We are not finished. Paxton. I said, my voice flat and cold. You are. Vernon, please. Paxton's voice gave out. He was crying. I could hear the sob catching in his throat. I will hand you anything, a seat on the board. The chairman title fully restored. Just get down here. I need you beside me. I can't do this by myself. I don't have the passwords. I don't know the protocols. I am terrified, Vernon. Please. For just a moment, a single brief moment, something in me softened. I thought about the 10-year-old boy I used to take to baseball games. But then the memory of Loretta's funeral came rushing back. The look on his face, the way he had laughed when the police walked me to the car. He wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry the walls had closed in on him. If I pulled him out of this now, he would learn absolutely nothing. He'd wait 6 months and find a new angle to drive the knife in. I am not coming down there, Paxton, I said. What? Paxton gasped. But you have to. No, I said. I don't. You wanted the CEO chair. You wanted to be the man with all the authority. Well, this is what authority actually feels like. It feels like weight pressing down on your chest. It feels like responsibility that won't let you sleep. You can't outsource it. You can't pay someone else to carry what you signed up for. Vernon, wait, Paxton pleaded. I am done waiting, I told him. You have a board meeting at 8:00 a.m. I'd use the next few hours to put together your resignation speech. Because when I walk into that room in the morning, I am not coming as your stepfather. I am coming as your creditor. But I can't fix it, Paxton wailed. I know, I said. That is the entire point. Good night, Paxton. I set the phone down. In the penthouse office at the other end of that line, Paxton stood holding the receiver. The dial tone droned in his ear, flat, monotonous, final. He let the phone fall onto the desk. He stared at the red screens. They hadn't moved. Unchanged. Unforgiving. He let out a scream. It was raw and animal rage and despair tangled into one sound. He grabbed the glass paperweight from his desk and flung it at the wall. It exploded into fragments. He seized his laptop and drove it into the floor. He kicked the chair across the room. He ripped the paintings clean off the walls. He tore the office apart, the same way he had torn the company apart. He ended up on his knees in the center of the wreckage chest, heaving his expensive suit destroyed. He was alone in that red light. The silence pressing in around him was almost unbearable. He understood in that moment that the chairman's silence had never been weakness. It had been the stillness before the blade falls, and the man holding the blade was walking through the door in the morning. The sun came up over Cleveland on Monday, but inside the boardroom on the 50th floor of the Calhoun Global Tower, It might as well have been the dead of winter. The air conditioning droned on, but the 20 people arranged around the massive oval table were sweating straight through their clothing. These were the shareholders, the directors, the people who controlled where the money flowed. And every last one of them was watching Paxton Grady with the kind of hunger you see in a pack of wolves that has a wounded deer surrounded. Paxton occupied the head of the table. He bore no resemblance to the arrogant young prince who had thrown me out a week ago. His suit was crumpled. His tie hung loose and undone around his neck like a noose. His eyes were red and raw from a night spent demolishing his own office. He gripped a coffee cup in both hands, as if that alone could hold him together. On the wall behind him, the enormous screen still showed the same red error message that had been haunting him for 24 hours. License expired. Angry voices filled the room. A man named Mr. Hartley, who represented the pension fund holding 15% of the company, was on his feet, with his finger leveled at Paxton. "This is completely unacceptable," Hartley shouted, his face going a deep, furious purple. "We have shed 30% of our market value in pre-market trading alone. The press is calling us the Titanic of the trucking industry. Techstream has placed a lien on our accounts. We cannot even cover the cost of fuel, Paxton. What is your plan?" Paxton opened his mouth, but what came out was barely a rasp. "I am working on it," he managed. "It is just a negotiating position. Vernon will come around." "Vernon is in jail," Hartley shot back, slamming his palm onto the table. "You put him there. You had the founder of this company arrested on charges that look more like a cover story for your own failures with every passing hour. And now there are reports that he owns the software outright. Is that true, Paxton? Does the man you threw behind bars hold the keys to everything in this building?" Paxton dropped his gaze to the tabletop. He could not look anyone in the eye. "It is complicated," he breathed. "It is not complicated," a woman from the investment bank said, cutting through. "It is negligence. We are moving to remove you as CEO effective immediately. We need to stop the bleeding before this vessel goes completely under." "But you can't do that," Paxton begged, looking up with desperate eyes. "I am the majority shareholder. My mother's stock passed to me. You don't have the authority to remove me." "We do if you are in breach of fiduciary duty," Hartley said. "And destroying the company in 5 days qualifies as exactly that." The room erupted. Everyone was speaking over everyone else. They were debating liquidation. They were talking about selling off the assets piece by piece. They were dividing up the remains of my life's work, while the boy who had brought it to ruin sat there watching it happen. I stood just outside the double oak doors, taking in the noise. I straightened my cuffs. I checked my tie in the glass wall's reflection. Then I looked at the team assembled behind me. On my right was Celeste, my attorney. She was carrying a thick leather binder packed with the truth. Her expression was composed, focused, and ready for a fight. On my left stood Gus. He was not in a suit. He had on a brand new Calhoun Global Mechanics uniform, pressed and spotless, his name stitched neatly above his heart. Behind Gus stood 10 other people, the senior dispatchers, the fleet managers, the head of HR, every key person Paxton had fired. They were the lifeblood of this company. They were the ones who understood how to keep it breathing. I looked over at Gus. "You ready for this, old friend?" I asked. Gus cracked his knuckles, fixed his eyes on those doors. "I have been ready since Tuesday, boss. Let's go take back our house." I reached out and pushed the doors open. They swung inward with a slow, commanding weight. The noise inside the boardroom cut off instantly, as though someone had yanked the plug on a speaker. 20 heads turned as one. They saw me standing there, Vernon Calhoun. The man they believed was still sitting in a holding cell. The man they had been told was a thief. I did not ease my way into the room. I walked in with the measured, heavy stride of a man who knows exactly whose floor he is standing on. My team came in behind me. We spread out as we entered, moving through the room like a phalanx. Gus took his place at my side, arms crossed his bearing, carrying the quiet, unshakable weight of someone who has never stopped working a day in his life. Paxton stared at me. His jaw came unhinged. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he cannot explain. "Vernon," he whispered, "how did you—" I didn't answer him. I walked the full length of the table, straight to the far end, directly across from where Paxton sat. I rested my hands on the back of the empty chair that normally belonged to the vice chairman. I looked around that room, meeting the eyes of every board member in turn. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying easily without a single raised note. "I apologize for the delay. I was held up by a misunderstanding involving your current CEO and the Cleveland Police Department." Hartley looked at me. There was confusion in his face, but something else too, relief. "Mr. Calhoun," he said, "and we were told you were being held without bail." I smiled. "A misunderstanding," I said again. "But I haven't come here to discuss my legal situation. I've come to talk about your debt." Paxton lurched to his feet. He knocked his coffee cup sideways, sending cold brown liquid spreading across the polished wood. "You have no right to be in this room," Paxton shouted, his voice breaking apart. "Security, remove him. He's trespassing. He's a criminal." He swung his gaze toward the corner of the room where the head of security was posted. It was Darnell, the same guard who had watched me walk out in shame on Tuesday, the same guard whose family I had stepped in to help when his daughter fell ill. Darnell Paxton screamed, thrusting a finger at me. "Get him out of here. That is a direct order." Every person in that room held their breath. Every eye moved to Darnell. Paxton was technically still CEO. He was still the man who signed the paperwork. Refusing him was insubordination. Darnell looked at Paxton. He looked at the coffee dripping off the table's edge. He took in the disheveled, wild-eyed panic of a boy dressed up as a king. Then his eyes came to me. He saw Gus standing there in his uniform. He saw the team of people who had built this place alongside me. He saw the man who had constructed the very walls he was paid to guard. Darnell took one step forward. He straightened his belt. He looked Paxton directly in the eye. "I'm sorry, Mr. Grady," Darnell said, his voice level and unhurried. "But I can't do that." Paxton's face went crimson. "What do you mean you can't? I am your employer. I am ordering you to remove this man from the premises." "No, sir," Darnell said. "You sign the checks, but that's not the same as paying the salary. The salary comes from the company itself, and under the bylaws, security reports to the board of directors. Right now, it appears the board is inclined to hear what Mr. Calhoun has to say." "You're fired!" Paxton shrieked. "Every one of you is finished. I'll bring in new guards. I'll call the police. Get out, all of you." Not a single person moved. The silence that followed was dense with something shifting, the sound of power, changing hands, gravity reversing course. Paxton was hurling commands at a force of nature and expecting the storm to obey. I leaned forward and pressed my knuckles quietly against the table. "Sit down, Paxton," I said. My voice didn't need volume. It carried the authority of 40 years of building something real. The voice that had kept fleets moving through blizzards, that had sat across from union leaders and senators, that had never once asked for permission to be heard. Paxton stopped mid-shout. He looked around the room. He saw the board members watching him with undisguised contempt. He saw Darnell standing unmoved, arms folded. He saw Gus staring him down. He understood in that instant that he was standing in a room full of people and was entirely alone. He dropped back into his chair. I turned to face the board. "You are all wondering why those screens are still red," I said, gesturing toward the wall. "You're wondering why the trucks haven't moved. You're wondering why TechStream is already moving against your accounts." I nodded to Celeste. She stepped up and laid the leather binder open on the table, turning it to the page bearing the master service agreement. "Here is your answer," I said. Paxton Grady believed that Calhoun Global was an inheritance, a kingdom handed down with the furniture. He thought the trucks and the software and the name on the building were simply things he'd been given, but he was wrong. Calhoun Global is an operating entity. It is a tenant. And I am the landlord. I moved slowly along the length of the table, making my way toward Paxton. "For 10 years, I have been leasing the intellectual property and the physical assets to this company at well below their market value," I said. "I did that because I wanted to see the company grow. I did that because I was determined to protect the livelihoods of every person who worked here. But the lease carries conditions." I stopped directly behind Paxton's chair. I could practically smell the sour sweat of his dread. "Condition number 1, I said, turning my gaze to Hartley. "The company must maintain the fleet in accordance with the Calhoun Protocol." Paxton dismissed the only mechanics qualified to do that. "Condition number 2, the company must remain solvent." Paxton burned through the reserves, throwing a party. "And condition number 3, I rested my hand on the back of Paxton's chair. He flinched. "No legal action may be brought against the intellectual property holder." I looked down at him. "You sued me, Paxton," I said quietly. "You had me arrested. You accused me of stealing my own rent money, and in doing so, you triggered the default clause." I raised my eyes back to the board. "As of Sunday at noon, the lease is terminated. I am recalling my assets, the trucks, the software, the brand. Every bit of it belongs to Calhoun Intellectual Properties. And since Calhoun Global holds no assets, no cash, and no functional leadership, it is effectively insolvent." Hartley leaned over the binder. He looked up at me. His face had gone the color of old chalk. "So, what exactly are you telling us?" Hartley asked. "Are you shutting the whole thing down? Is the company finished?" "No," I said. "I am not shutting it down. I am repossessing it." I tapped Paxton on the shoulder. "Stand up, son," I said. Paxton looked up at me. His eyes were wet, genuinely wet. The tears of a child who has smashed something he has no idea how to repair. "Where am I supposed to go?" he said, barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I told him. "But you cannot stay here. That is my chair." Paxton got to his feet slowly. He looked diminished. He looked breakable. He moved away from the head of the table. He passed the board members, none of whom could bring themselves to meet his gaze. He walked past Gus, who stepped to the side to let him through. He walked past Darnell, who pulled the door open without a salute. When the door clicked shut behind him, the entire room exhaled. The toxicity drained out of the air. The infection had been cut away. I settled into the chair. It felt like putting on something that had always belonged to me. I looked over at Gus. "Gus," I said. "Yes, boss. Go down to the server room. Put your thumb on the scanner. Then get your team firing up the engines. We have a backlog of deliveries and a lot of ground to make up." Gus smiled the kind of smile that could fill a room with light. "On it, boss." I looked back at the board members. They were waiting, watching me, trying to read whether I was going to make them pay for the side they had chosen. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, opening the binder, "there is a great deal of work ahead of us. We need to restructure the debt. We need to get on the phone with our customers and start making things right. And we need to rebuild what was lost. But before any of that, We are going to rehire every single person who was let go this week, and we are going to bring them back with a raise. Hartley gave a slow nod. Agreed, Vernon. Whatever you need. I turned back toward the red screen on the wall. Down in the basement, Gus reached the scanner. The red flickered. It went black. And then one by one, green lights began to populate the screen. The map of North America came back to life. The heartbeat of the company resumed its steady rhythm. I leaned back in the chair. The king had come home, and this time the kingdom would be built on something solid, not on sand. The boardroom had gone quiet again, but it wasn't a comfortable quiet. It was the airless stillness before something gives way. Paxton was standing at the window, staring out at the skyline he had believed was his to claim. He turned back to face the room, cheeks flushed, a storm of anger and confusion moving across his face. He raised a trembling finger and pointed it at me, then swept it toward the board. "This is illegal," Paxton shouted, his voice bouncing off the glass. "You can't walk in here and simply declare ownership. My mother left me the majority shares. I have the paperwork. I am the rightful owner of Calhoun Global Logistics. I hold 51% of the stock. You don't have the power to strip that from me." I remained where I was in the leather chair. I watched him thrash. It was like watching a man try to fight his way out of quicksand, every movement pulling him deeper. I didn't say a word. I simply looked toward Celeste. Celeste rose from her seat. She didn't spare Paxton a glance. Her attention went straight to the board members. She spread open the leather binder in front of her. The only sound in the room was the deliberate turning of heavy pages. She settled her glasses and began speaking in a tone that was composed, precise, and quietly lethal. "Mr. Grady is correct on one point," Celeste said. "He does own 51% of the stock in Calhoun Global Logistics Incorporated, an entity left to him by the late Loretta Calhoun. However, Mr. Grady appears to fundamentally misunderstand what that entity actually represents." Paxton drove his palm down on the table. "It's the company, it's the trucks, it's the buildings, it's everything." "No," Celeste said, looking up from the page. "It isn't. Calhoun Global Logistics Incorporated is a service provider. It is an operating shell established 20 years ago purely for liability purposes. Its sole function is to hire drivers, manage schedules, and file taxes. It does not own a single physical asset." The room went deadly still. Hartley, the representative from the pension fund, leaned forward in his chair. "Say that again," Hartley said, his eyes sharpening. Celeste turned a page and lifted a diagram for the room to see. It showed two boxes. One was small, labeled Calhoun Global. The other was enormous, labeled Calhoun Holdings. "Vernon Calhoun is the sole proprietor of Calhoun Holdings, LLC," Celeste explained. "That holding company holds the title to every truck in the fleet. It holds the deeds to the distribution centers in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati. It owns the copyright to the brand logo. And most critically, it owns the proprietary source code for the logistics software." She turned her gaze to Paxton, who had drifted back against the wall looking like a man fighting back nausea. "For the past 10 years, Celeste continued, Calhoun Global has been operating under a lease arrangement. It rents the trucks from Calhoun Holdings. It licenses the software from Calhoun Holdings. It leases the buildings from Calhoun Holdings. The operating company that Mr. Grady inherited is at its core a tenant, and Mr. Calhoun is the landlord." "But my mother," Paxton stammered. "She told me she was leaving me the business." "She left you the operating rights," Celeste said, correcting him firmly. "She left you the job, Paxton. She left you the responsibility of managing the day-to-day. But she understood you were young and unproven. She understood the assets needed a layer of protection around them. So she and Vernon agreed that the hard assets, the real wealth, would stay inside the holding company under Vernon's control." It was a safeguard, a mechanism to ensure that if management stumbled, the assets wouldn't be swallowed by creditors. I spoke then. My voice came out low and coarse, like gravel underfoot. She was protecting the company from precisely this kind of moment, Paxton, I said. She understood that someday a person might step in who valued appearances over substance. Someone who'd drain the maintenance fund throwing a party. Someone who'd let the mechanics go to shave a little off the budget. She wanted to guarantee that person could never sell the trucks to fund some private luxury. Paxton looked at me. His eyes were wide and swimming in panic. So what does that actually mean for me? It means, Celeste said, closing the binder with a sharp, clean snap, that you own 100% of nothing. The stock you hold belongs to a company that carries no assets. Its entire value is derived from its contracts with Mr. Calhoun. And as of yesterday, every one of those contracts is void. This was the guillotine falling. The case had been laid out brick by brick. The trap had closed. Now came the sentence. I rose from my seat slowly. I crossed to the whiteboard at the front of the room, picked up a marker, and wrote a single number, 0. That is the value of your inheritance, as of this morning, Paxton, I said. I turned to the board. They were watching me with a combination of awe and dread. They understood they had backed the wrong side. They had wagered on the jockey with the polished silks instead of the man who owned the horse. Under the terms of the master lease agreement, I said words I had drafted myself. Decades ago, the landlord reserves the right to terminate the lease immediately upon any breach of contract. I raised 3 fingers. Breach number 1, failure to maintain the assets. By dismissing the certified mechanics, you violated the maintenance clause. Breach number 2, insolvency. By burning through the reserve fund, you violated the financial stability clause. Breach number 3, hostile action against the owner. By having me arrested and accusing me of theft, you violated the good faith clause. I put my hand down. Therefore, I am formally exercising my right to recall all assets. Effective immediately, Calhoun Holdings is repossessing every truck, every trailer, and every computer terminal. We are revoking the software license. We are pulling the signage from the buildings. I looked at Paxton. You have a company, Paxton, but you have no trucks to move. You have no software to route them. You have no buildings to house them in. You have a customer list and a mountain of debt, but nothing capable of generating $1 of revenue. You are the captain of a ghost ship. Hartley got to his feet. He leveled a look of pure contempt at Paxton before turning to me. Is this really enforceable? He asked. Can you actually do all of this? It's already done, I said. My people are in the lot right now putting new decals on the trucks. The registrations are being transferred. The software has been patched to reject any login from your domain. What about the clients? Hartley pressed. The contracts. I smiled. The clients want their freight delivered. The name printed on the invoice is irrelevant to them. I reached out to the major accounts over the weekend. I extended a new contract with Calhoun Holdings. They all signed this morning. Why wouldn't they? I have the trucks. I have the drivers. I have the software. Paxton has a headache and a lawsuit. I walked back to the table and lifted the glass of water that had been sitting untouched in front of Paxton's empty chair. I took a sip. So, ladies and gentlemen, I said, addressing the board, you have a decision to make. You can remain on this sinking vessel with Paxton. You can try to take me to court. You can spend the next 5 years fighting this while the company dissolves into nothing. Or you can vote right now to dissolve Calhoun Global Logistics Incorporated. You can liquidate the shell, and I will offer you a swap your worthless stock exchanged for shares in Calhoun Holdings. I will bring you onto my board. The business continues without a single day of interruption. It wasn't really a choice at all. It was a hand extended to drowning people. I was offering them an exit from the wreckage Paxton had made. Hartley didn't pause. He looked directly at Paxton. I move to dissolve the corporation, he said. Seconded, said the woman from the investment bank. Paxton made a sound that landed somewhere between a sob and a scream. You cannot do this, he yelled. This is my company. My mother created this. Your mother created it with me, I roared. The words hit the walls like a thunderclap. I laid the foundation, Paxton. I turned the wrenches. I ran the roots myself when you were still in diapers. She built this for both of us, not for you to tear apart. She built it to take care of this family, not to prop up your ego. I stepped toward him until there was nothing but air between us. You wanted to be the big man, Paxton. You wanted to sit at the grown-up table. Well, here is how the grown-ups operate. We read the fine print. We protect what we've built, and we don't bite the hand that made us. Paxton looked at me. For the first time, I saw it total collapse behind his eyes. The arrogance had drained away. The entitlement was gone. What remained was a frightened child who had just realized he was standing naked in a blizzard. He looked down at his own hands. He looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. He looked at the red error screen bleeding slowly to black. I am ruined, he whispered. I personally guaranteed the TechStream loan. If this company goes under, they come after me directly. They'll take my house. They'll strip me of everything. I know, I said without warmth. You signed that agreement without reading a word of it. Remember, you wanted the credit. Now you have the debt. But I could go to prison, Paxton said, his voice cracking. Means that if I can't cover the debts, they'll charge me with fraud. I studied him for a moment. I thought about the night he'd had me taken away. I thought about the cold of that cell. I thought about the smirk on his face when they put me in the car. Monday is something, isn't it, Paxton? I said. I turned my back on him. Get him out, I said to Darnell, the security guard. Darnell moved forward. He placed a firm hand on Paxton's shoulder. Time to go, Mr. Grady, Darnell said. Paxton let himself be guided away. He didn't resist. He didn't raise his voice. He shuffled along like a condemned man walking a corridor he'd never leave. He moved out of the boardroom and out of the life he had never once earned. When the door closed, the room went quiet again. But this time the quiet felt like the stillness of a field after the last shot has been fired. I looked around at the board members. They were waiting. Let's get to work, I said. We have freight to move. Celeste slid a pen across to me. I signed the first document of the new era. The name on the line was Vernon Calhoun, written in ink that would not fade. The vote to remove Paxton Grady as CEO of Calhoun Global Logistics was not a debate. It was a disposal. The board members didn't look at him as their hands went up. They looked at the spreadsheets. They looked at the projected losses. They stared at the staggering reality of a zero-revenue week. Hartley called the motion, and every hand in the room lifted without hesitation. Unanimous. In under 60 seconds, the reign of the prince was finished. Paxton stood at the head of the table with both hands gripping the back of the chair he had declared his birthright. His knuckles had gone white. He looked like a man who'd been thrown from a great height with nothing to break his fall. He tried to form words, but his voice had gone thin and unsteady. You can't do this, he stammered. I hold the majority shares. I have rights. You have equity. Hartley said, his voice cold, as he shut his folder. That is not the same as executive authority. We are removing you for cause, Paxton. Gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and frankly for being the single most catastrophic liability this company has ever had to absorb. You are out effective immediately. Paxton looked at me. He was searching for something, a trace of the stepfather who used to patch up his scraped knees. But that man was not in this room. That man had been arrested and publicly humiliated. The person sitting across from him now was the chairman of Calhoun Holdings, and I had no mercy left in reserve. "I suggest you collect your things, Paxton," I said. "Security will walk you to the elevator. You have 10 minutes to clear your personal belongings from the office." Paxton turned toward Britt, who had been hovering near the door. She'd kept herself quiet, trying to disappear into the background, hoping that if she stayed still enough, the storm would only take her husband. "Come on," Britt, Paxton said, reaching for her hand. "We're leaving. We'll call our attorneys. We'll sue every one of them." Britt pulled her hand away. She looked at Paxton with undisguised revulsion. "We," she said. "There is no we, Paxton. You are the one who got himself fired. You are the one who destroyed everything. I am not going anywhere with you." Paxton stared at her. His mouth worked open and shut like a man drowning in shallow water. Even at the very bottom of his fall, the person standing next to him was walking away. But before Paxton could take the single step toward the door, Celeste rose from her seat. She cleared her throat. Sharp. Deliberate. It stopped Paxton where he stood. "Not so fast, Mr. Grady," Celeste said. "And you as well, Mrs. Grady. Both of you please sit down. The board meeting may be over, but the legal inquiry is only just getting started." Paxton froze. "What are you talking about? I'm leaving." "You're free to leave," Celeste said, opening a fresh file on the table. "But I don't believe you'll get very far. You see, while Mr. Calhoun was reclaiming his assets, I conducted a forensic audit of the company accounts covering the last 6 months. Specifically, the discretionary spending accounts that you and your wife have been drawing from." Britt went pale. She took a step back toward the exit, but Darnell, the security guard, moved to block her path. He crossed his arms. His expression said everything his words didn't need to. Celeste pulled out a stack of bank statements and slid them down the length of the polished table. They spread out like a hand of cards, each sheet dense with highlighted transactions. The maintenance fund that Mr. Calhoun established was designated strictly for fleet repairs and emergency equipment replacement, Celeste told the horrified board members. However, according to these records, $300,000 was transferred out of that fund in the last 2 weeks alone. None of it went to mechanics. None of it went to parts suppliers. She lifted the first sheet, $50,000 to a luxury event planner for the rebranding gala, $20,000 to a jeweler in Paris for a diamond bracelet, $10,000 for a weekend retreat at a spa in Aspen. Celeste glanced at Britt. "And my personal favorite, $15,000 for a custom wardrobe consultation, entered in the ledger as uniform redesign." Gasps moved around the table. Hartley picked up one of the statements, his hands trembling with rage. "This is theft," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This goes beyond mismanagement. This is criminal fraud. You raided corporate funds to bankroll your lifestyle while this company hemorrhaged cash." Paxton tried to scramble for an explanation. He tried to work the lie one final time. "It was for the brand," he shouted, perspiration running freely down his face. "We needed to project success to bring in investors. It was a legitimate marketing expense." "A diamond bracelet is not a marketing expense," Celeste said, her voice cutting straight through him. "And neither is the down payment on a Ferrari which you charged to the payroll account last Friday. That is why the driver's checks bounced, Paxton. You didn't just drain the reserves, you took their wages." Britt began to cry. Loud, theatrical, practiced sobbing. She leveled a shaking finger at Paxton. "He made me do it," she wailed. "I had no idea where the money was coming from. He told me it was his bonus. He told me we were wealthy. I am the victim in all of this. Paxton looked at her with pure betrayal burning in his eyes. You are a liar, he screamed. You picked out the bracelet yourself. You booked the spa. You told me if I didn't give you those things, you'd walk out on me. They stood tearing into each other, hurling accusations, clawing at each other in front of the entire room. It was ugly. It was the rot that had been festering beneath the surface finally dragged into the open. They were never partners. They were co-conspirators who had turned on each other the instant the fire got too close. I took no pleasure in watching it. It was pitiable, but it had to be seen. The board needed to understand exactly who had been occupying the captain's chair. Then the double doors swung open again. It wasn't a lawyer this time. It wasn't a security guard. 4 men in dark blue windbreakers entered the room. Bright yellow letters across their backs read, "Police." Behind them came 2 detectives in suits. These weren't the patrol officers Paxton had sicked on me. These were from the Economic Crimes Unit. They moved like people who do not make mistakes. One of the detectives stepped to the front of the room. He held up a warrant. Paxton Grady and Britt Grady, he announced, his voice filling the stunned silence. You are under arrest for grand larceny, corporate embezzlement, and securities fraud. Paxton went rigid. He looked at the officers. He looked at the windows. He scanned the room for any opening, any exit, but there was none. The walls he had built to lock me out had become the walls of his own cage. This is a mistake, Paxton whispered. My stepfather, ask him. He'll explain. He turned to face me. His eyes were wide and begging. Vernon, tell them. Tell them it was just a misunderstanding. I'll make it right. I swear to you, just don't let them take me. I looked at him. I sat without moving. I cannot help you, Paxton, I said. I'm just the landlord. I don't get involved in what the tenants do with their time, especially when what they've been doing is commit crimes. The detectives closed in. They were not gentle about it. They took Paxton by the arms and spun him around. The handcuffs ratcheted shut with a sharp, metallic sound. Click, click, click. It was the same sound I had heard 3 days ago in reverse, but this time it rang out like justice. Britt tried to run. She made a genuine attempt to cut past Darnell, but her heels caught, and she went down. The female officer pulled her up off the floor and secured her hands behind her back. Britt was screaming about her rights, screaming that she was a Grady, screaming that none of this could possibly be real. But it was real. It was very, very real. Take them out, the detective said. They moved them toward the doors. The procession of shame traveled the full length of the room. The board members turned their chairs away, unwilling to watch the disgraced couple pass. Paxton drew even with me. He was no more than 2 FT'd away. He stopped. The detective pushed at him, but Paxton planted his feet. He looked at me. His face was slick with tears and sweat. He had the look of a child desperate for his father to make it stop. Dad, he whispered. The word floated in the air between us. He hadn't used that word in 20 years. I did not look at him. I did not turn my head. I did not blink. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead on the empty leather chair at the top of the table. The chair Loretta had chosen, the chair I had earned. I reached out and laid my hand on the armrest. The leather was cool and smooth beneath my palm. Solid. Real. The only thing in that room that required my attention. Vernon. Paxton pleaded, his voice fracturing. Please, look at me. I picked up a pen from the table. I drew open the file Celeste had placed before me. I turned to the restructuring plan and began to read. Get him out, I said to no one and everyone. The detective pushed Paxton forward. The crying resumed a low, hollow sound that diminished as they dragged him down the hallway. The elevator chimed. The doors parted, then closed. And then it was quiet. The room was still. The air itself felt different, lighter, cleaner. The scent of expensive perfume and fear was already dissipating, giving way to coffee and old paper. I looked up at last. I looked at the chair where Paxton had been sitting just 10 minutes before. It was empty. The usurper was gone. The pretender had been removed. I stood up and walked to the head of the table. I pulled the chair out and sat down. It gave a low groan beneath me, that old familiar welcome. I swung it around to face the window looking out over the city of Cleveland. Down on the highway, the trucks had started moving again. I could make out the tiny white rectangles bearing the Calhoun logo threading through the city's veins. I turned back to face the room. They were watching me, waiting for direction. "The fall is over," I said. "Now we rise, let us get to work." The hardest part of any war is not the fighting, it is the cleaning up. The boardroom had emptied, and the police had gone with their prisoners, but the building still carried the wreckage of Paxton's tenure. Invoices had gone unpaid. Customers had been screamed at. And most critically, there were hundreds of workers who were terrified about what came next. They had watched colleagues get let go. They had seen the company teeter at the edge. They needed more than a paycheck. They needed to feel solid ground beneath them again. I left the executive suite and walked down to the main loading dock. This was the true heart of Calhoun Global. A cavernous space thick with the smell of diesel cardboard and hard labor. I asked Darnell, the head of security, to pull everyone together, the drivers, the warehouse crew, the dispatchers, the mechanics. They gathered in a wide semicircle around a stack of pallets. They looked worn down. They looked guarded. They had no way of knowing whether I was there to rescue them or to finish what Paxton had started. I did not use a podium. I stood on the bare concrete right in front of them. I looked out across that sea of faces. Men and women I had known for 20 years. New hires whose eyes were wide with fear. "I owe every one of you an apology," I said. My voice carried through the open space. I let this happen. I built this company to be a fortress, then left the gate wide open. I believed that stepping back meant giving the next generation room to lead. I was wrong. I handed a loaded weapon to a child. And because of my mistake, each of you paid the price. You lost sleep. You lost wages. You lost your sense of security. For that, I am truly sorry. The room went silent. They were not accustomed to hearing a CEO speak that way. Paxton had never offered an apology in his life. But sorry doesn't put food on the table, I pressed on. And sorry is no guarantee it won't happen again. What I've come to understand this week is that a company cannot belong to a single family because bloodlines can run weak. A character can get corrupted. The only people who truly care whether this business survives are the ones who bleed for it every day. I nodded to Celeste. She passed me a stack of papers. As of this morning, I have dissolved the old operating structure, I announced. We are forming a new entity, and under the new charter, 30% of the company stock is being transferred into an employee stock ownership plan. A murmur rolled through the crowd. People glanced at one another. It hadn't sunk in yet. "It means you are not just employees anymore," I said, lifting my voice. "It means you are owners. When the company turns a profit, you share in that profit. When the stock climbs, your retirement climbs with it. And most importantly, it means no one can ever sell this company out from under you again because you will have a vote on the board." The shock softened into smiles, then the smiles broke open into cheering. It began with Gus bringing his heavy, grease-blackened hands together. Then Darnell joined in. then the drivers. Before long, the entire loading dock was thundering with applause. It was not the polite kind. It was the sound of relief. It was the sound of loyalty given back where it was owed. I spent the next 2 hours shaking hands. I signed checks from my personal account to cover the bounced payroll. I listened to their stories. I rebuilt the bridge Paxton had burned to ash. I was exhausted. Every bone in my body ached, but my chest felt lighter than it had in years. After the meeting, I called Gus into my office. He still had his mechanic's uniform on, but there was a new badge waiting for him on the desk. He looked at it. It read, Director of Fleet Operations. Gus stared at the thing. He wiped his hands on his pants before he reached for it. Boss, he said, I fix engines. I don't sit in meetings. I don't know how to wear a tie. You don't need to wear a tie, Gus, I told him. You need to wear your experience. Paxton fired the experts because they made him feel small. I'm promoting the experts because I need them. You know more about these trucks than the engineers who built them. I need you running the maintenance division. I need you training the young guys. I need you making sure that no Calhoun truck ever breaks down on the highway again. Gus picked up the badge. His hands were trembling slightly. I won't let you down, Vernon, he said. I know you won't, I replied. Now get out of here. You've got an office to set up, and Gus, take the iPad. You're going to need it to approve the budget. Gus laughed. He took the badge and walked out. There was something different in how he carried himself. He wasn't just a dinosaur anymore. He was the apex predator of that garage. While we were putting things back together, the world outside was tearing Paxton and Britt apart. News of their arrest had gone viral. The internet is a merciless judge. For years, Britt had tended a perfect digital life photos of her clothes, her cars, her vacations. She had turned envy into a brand. But now the curtain had been yanked back. Social media did not offer pity. It fed. The mugshot of Britt with mascara streaked down her face and her hair in disarray was trending across every platform. People were picking apart her old posts, spotting the stolen money in every frame. Nice bracelet, read one comment. Too bad it was bought with stolen driver wages. Another user put up a video of Britt screaming at a waiter from a few months back. The caption read, This is the real face of the Grady heiress. Her following collapsed from 100,000 to nothing overnight. Every brand she had worked with put out a statement cutting ties. Her reputation was reduced to ash. She had lived on the applause of strangers, and now she was being consumed by their contempt. She had lost her freedom, but the death of her digital fame was the wound that would cut the deepest. She was no longer an influencer. She was a cautionary tale. As for Paxton, the legal analysts were projecting a 5-year sentence. The fraud was too well documented. The arrogance had been too visible. He would spend his 30s in a cell turning over in his mind the empire he had held and crushed. He would have plenty of time to learn the difference between price and value. The sun began to sink over the city. The sky went deep purple, bruising into black. The office was quiet. The red screens were gone, replaced by the steady green glow of a working system. I moved through the empty hallways. I switched off the lights in the conference room. I stood for a moment, looking at the spot where Paxton had stood and begged. The ghosts were gone. I rode the elevator down to the garage. My Buick LeSabre sat waiting in the VIP spot. It was clean and polished, but I walked past it. I headed to the far corner of the lot, where a rusted 1995 Chevy CK pickup sat parked. My first truck. I had kept it alive all these years. I pulled the door open. The hinge groaned. The cab smelled of old leather and dust. I climbed in. The engine caught with a rough, mechanical roar. It was a sound I loved. It was the sound of honesty. I pulled out of the garage and onto the street. I did not go home. I drove north toward the cemetery. The gates were open. I moved slowly along the winding path until I reached the hill where Loretta was buried. I parked and stepped out. The air was cold, but the wind had gone still. It was peaceful. I walked to her grave. The dirt was still fresh from the funeral a week ago. The flowers Paxton had ordered were dead and brown. I cleared them away. I knelt down on the grass. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the set of keys to the executive suite. The keys Paxton had demanded from me. The keys to the kingdom. I set them on the headstone. "I did it, Loretta," I whispered. "I saved it. It got a little messy. I had to be hard. I had to be someone you might not recognize for a few days. But the house is clean. The people are safe. And the boy has been stopped." I pressed my hand against the cold stone. "I miss you," I said. "The quiet is deafening without you. But I am going to keep going. I am going to pass down what you gave me, that a legacy is not what you leave behind for people. It is what you plant inside them." I got to my feet. I brushed the dirt from my knees. I looked out at the city lights glittering in the distance. They seemed different tonight. They no longer looked like targets waiting to be taken. They looked like lit windows, families waiting on their deliveries. I made my way back to the truck. I settled in and laid my hands on the steering wheel. I was 68 years old. I was alone, but I was the chairman, and tomorrow there was work to be done. I put it in gear and rolled out of the cemetery. The road stretching ahead was dark, but my headlights pushed through it hard and bright. Monday had been something else, but Tuesday was going to be good. I had learned that a legacy cannot be handed over, it has to be earned. Paxton believed he could inherit respect the same way he inherited the stock certificates, but he discovered that respect is a currency you have to mint for yourself every single day. That is where Vernon's story lands. Not in the courtroom, not in the boardroom, but in a quiet cemetery at the end of a very long week, kneeling on cold grass with nothing in his hands but a set of keys and a clear conscience. It cost him more than most people will ever have to pay. He lost his wife, his company, his standing, and very nearly his freedom, all at the hands of someone he had raised and trusted. But I believe God does not let a man build something honest over 50 years just to watch it be stolen without recourse. The truth has its own timing, and when it finally arrived, it was complete. Here is what I take from Vernon's story, and I hope you will carry at least one of these with you. Never hand authority to someone who has not yet earned the weight of it. A title without character is a loaded risk. Document everything. The protection that saved Vernon was not muscle or money. It was paperwork signed years before the threat ever appeared. When someone moves against you in anger and arrogance, patience is not weakness. Let them overreach. Overconfidence is the most reliable enemy of the person trying to harm you. And remember, a legacy is not the empire you leave behind. It is the standard you leave inside the people who watched you build it. If this story moved you or made you think, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share it with someone in your life who could use a reminder that doing things the right way still means something. And if you are not already with us, subscribe to Family Revenge Stories. There is always another chapter worth hearing. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next story.